Good morning. I'm Eric Blank, and this is the Commissioners' Weekly Meeting for August 16th, 2023. Commissioner Plant, any preliminary remarks? Are you ready to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I'm ready to approve the consent agenda.
Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
As do I. The consent agenda is approved. We'll take up the Public Service Company rate case last. Let's skip to proceeding number 23AL-0243E. Mr. Acera, Mr. Davis, the Public Service Company of Colorado Phase 2 rate case.
Yeah, good morning, commissioners. Unless Mr. Davis, you wanted to jump in with some background first.
No, I think we can jump right to the matters at hand.
All right, I have two things to present to you this morning. The first is a motion for pro hac vice admission from the federal executive agencies. We're going to have to table that. We haven't gotten the verification from Office of Attorney Registration that the background checks came back and that the fee has been paid. So we can take that up once we get that. The other procedural item for you this morning, or actually the one other procedural item for you this morning, is the motion for extraordinary protection that Public Service filed on May 15th. This is the standard MEP that we see in rate cases. The utility asks for extraordinary protection of detailed individual customer information and customer information that, when aggregated, is still granular enough that disclosure is prohibited by our Rule 3033B, which is the 1515 rule. So in this case, Public Service is requesting that access be limited to the commissioners, advisory staff and advisory attorneys on the proceeding, trial staff and its attorneys on the proceeding, UCA and its attorneys on the proceeding, a reasonable number of subject matter experts for other interveners who require access for purposes of this proceeding and who do not represent a party who will gain an unfair competitive advantage by having this information, and a reasonable number of attorneys for other interveners who require access for purposes of this proceeding and who do not represent a party who will gain an unfair competitive advantage by having this information. The company also requests that any party granted access destroy the information at the conclusion of the proceeding. Although I would note, as always, it's the company's responsibility to ensure that the information is destroyed at the conclusion. So my recommendation for you all this morning is that you grant the motion. It's consistent with the protection afforded in past rate cases, and it strikes a reasonable balance of providing appropriate access to the information while still protecting the interests of public service.
Commissioner Plant?
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
As do I.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. I'm Ron Davis of the Commission's advisory staff. I'd now like to present the proposed procedural schedule for this Phase 2 rate case. This case is linked to the Phase 1 rate case that will conclude today's weekly meeting. Last week, Public Service timely filed a motion to approve a proposed procedural schedule with the evidentiary hearing before the Commission en banc in December. The proposed schedule is tied to a motion for a waiver from the requirement to provide an encompass-based analysis regarding peak and off-peak periods for time of use rates, an analysis relevant to the design of rates in this Phase 2 proceeding. The encompass-based analysis was required by decision number C230483I. The proposed procedural schedule, which is unopposed, is as follows. Supplemental direct testimony in response to that decision would be filed on September 1st, provided that the Commission grants the motion. A second supplemental direct testimony would be filed on September 29th, linking the proposed rates to the outcome of the Phase 1 rate case, again, that will conclude today's meeting. Answer testimony would come in October, rebuttal testimony would come in mid-November. By late November, any settlement and settlement testimony would be filed, and then the evidentiary hearing would take place in the middle of December. In terms of timing, the schedule would allow for deliberations on final rates in late January and early February for the new base rates to take effect before the end of the statutory suspension period on February 20th. Turning to the motion, the decision I mentioned earlier requires Public Service to file supplemental direct testimony describing results from the company's Encompass model, the model used for bid evaluation and selection in the company's ongoing electric resource plan proceeding. The required analysis is intended to support a determination whether modified on-peak, off-peak, and shoulder time of use periods would better reflect the long-term needs of the system and motivate more appropriate customer behavior. In the motion for a waiver, which is also unopposed, Public Service states that it intends to provide some of the additional information required by the Commission, including data regarding the summer and winter peak loads of each year between 2024 and 2030, as well as analyses of the top 100 hours of each of those years. Public Service explains that a full...
I found this one.
Sorry about that.
Check that.
Too many devices on my desk. In that context, Public Service adds that it would need to hire a consultant, and it would estimate it would take possibly up to 6 months to do the appropriate analysis. Public Service estimates there would be costs in terms of tens of thousands of dollars to prepare the analysis. But most importantly, I think the company is currently working to prepare its 120-day report in the ongoing ERP proceeding using that Encompass modeling. And Public Service states that it would not be able to begin the development of the appropriate model inputs for this case until mid-September at the very earliest. So in lieu of the analysis contemplated by the Commission in its decision, Public Service proposes an alternative. It would quantify the costs and benefits of shifting demand during the 2030 peak day using a spreadsheet model. The benefit and cost calculations would use marginal energy and capacity costs from the ERP. And while the spreadsheet analysis would largely capture the spirit of the request of the Commission, it would not quantify the impact on the reserve margin and of the electric load carrying capability of the load shape. Now, Boulder does not oppose this motion, but it does request that the Commission require the company to perform this Encompass-based model as soon as possible and file it either in this proceeding or in another proceeding. Boulder requests that the Commission order this modeling at its next reasonable opportunity. Public Service, though, states that it opposes this request and offers that if the Commission is going to consider it, the company asks that the issue be addressed separately from today's motion. So the decision points for you this morning are whether to grant the motion for waivers and permit Public Service to file that spreadsheet analysis instead of the Encompass modeling. And if that motion is granted, whether to grant the motion to adopt the proposed procedural schedule. And then the Commission should decide whether to address Boulder's request for that Encompass-based modeling analysis to be formed, and that may simply entail setting some sort of response time to the request. I can answer questions or turn it now to you for your discussion and the votes on those three items.
Thanks, Mr. Davis. And I appreciate the company trying to meet us halfway in the spirit of the request. And I understand that the company's resource planning team is tied up in a probably multi-billion-dollar set of acquisitions and can see how this request could be a distraction. I'm also hoping that the company's proposal on the 100 highest hours and this spreadsheet analysis will get us most of what we want. So I'd grant the company's request for a variance, and given that, I'd also approve the procedural schedule as proposed. Personally, I'm interested in seeing this analysis, but wouldn't try and order it in this case or try and at this time try and pick where we do that. So, Commissioner Plant, what are you thinking?
I agree with that approach.
Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
And I guess while we're talking about the hearing, I just wouldn't mind brainstorming with you guys if you'd be open to doing this one live. It's 4 or 5 days starting December 5th. And, as the pandemic recedes into behind us, just wondering if it's maybe time to do a live hearing. And I'd be open to doing it hybrid too, if where I'd be in person and, maybe you guys could come in or out as you please. But any thoughts on that, Commissioner Plant? And we don't have to resolve it today, but just wondering if you have any initial thoughts since it's on the agenda.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd be fine with doing that. You were thinking it would be a week, somewhere around mid-December.
And I think it's, Mr. Davis, it's like 5 days starting the first or second week in December.
Actually, it's December 11th through the 15th, so it's that entire week, and then it's the 18th and 19th the following week.
Oh, okay. So 7 days.
Yeah,
Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd be fine with that, at least, consecutive days as opposed to, going back and forth. But so maybe part of it in person and then part of it I'd do remotely.
Okay. Commissioner Goman, any thoughts?
I wonder if it's something, I know this wasn't conventionally how it was done clearly, but nothing's done conventionally how it was done pre-COVID. I wonder if it's something we should hear from some of the interveners on. Like, I wondered the extent to which some of the budgets, especially of the smaller interveners participating, are based on if they need to have people appearing in person or not. Just a thought. Yeah, I mean, I'm somewhat open to the idea. I think it could feel awkward if it's part in person or if some of us are there or not, in terms of if a certain witness is there and everyone's there in person, then other witnesses are on and everyone's not. I don't want that to give the impression of some sort of preference or difference in attention that it sort of naturally could give, even though it's just how the schedule works out. So I'm a little worried about, I think a hybrid approach provides a level of flexibility that's nice, but I'm worried that it could appear, potentially not fair to every party if it's not conducted the same exact way when every party's testifying.
All right. So, Mr. Davis, we might just start kicking that around internally, and I don't know if we'd have to bring it back for a future weekly meeting, but appreciate the conversation. It raised a couple issues I hadn't focused on.
We will be talking more about schedule later. I think the commission will want to consider the scheduling of public comment hearings, for instance, in addition to how the hearing will be conducted. I think that if it hasn't already happened, there will be a decision coming out that talks about the electronic presentation of exhibits. And that will happen whether it's hybrid, in person, or entirely remote. So we will have more opportunities to talk about this.
Okay, and you'll help us work with council and your team to figure out a sensible approach that manages to all the issues.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else on this? I think that can be an ABC decision, granting the motion for extraordinary protection, setting the procedural schedule and discovery, and granting the request for a variance.
Okay, thank you. I'll see you later in the meeting.
See you in a bit. Proceeding number 23A-0046E, short-term power purchase agreements. Mr. Eden.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. I'm Michael Eden with your advisory staff. Today, I'm going to set up your deliberations on the unopposed comprehensive settlement agreement filed in this proceeding. For the benefit of the public, I'll start with some background. Back in January of 2023, Public Service Company of Colorado filed an application for approval of a portfolio of amendments and extensions for 4 short-term power purchase agreements, or PPAs. Approval of these PPAs would maintain 322 megawatts of accredited capacity over the years 2023 through 2026. 3 of these PPAs relate to separate gas-fired power plants, and the 4th relates to a wind facility. Along with public service, trial staff of the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, the Colorado Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate, the Colorado Energy Office, or CEO, the Colorado Independent Energy Association, Onward Energy Management, and Sierra Club are all parties to this proceeding. On June 9th, 2023, Public Service filed an unopposed comprehensive settlement agreement. Public Service and CEO subsequently filed settlement testimony in support of the settlement agreement. At a high level, the settling parties request that the Commission approve the 4 PPAs as set forth in the company's direct testimony and find that the PPAs are prudent, reasonable, and in the public interest. Likewise, the settling parties agree that the Commission should grant Public Services requests for limited waivers and variances from Rule 3615 and Commission Decision Number C06-1379. In addition to resolving the company's PPA requests, the settlement agreement also contains provisions relating to certain issues the Commission raised in its directives for supplemental direct testimony. Specifically, the settlement agreement creates new requirements for Public Service to file quarterly reports on the use and performance of the company's demand response and load management programs and pilots. Public Service similarly must incorporate the estimated demand reductions from time of use rates in the upcoming Pueblo Just Transition Plan proceeding, which will be filed no later than June of 2024. Lastly, the settlement agreement requires Public Service to engage customers in disproportionately impacted or DI communities located near the 3 gas-fired facilities at issue in this proceeding. That is, the communities near Brush 2, Brush 4, and the Arapahoe plant. During this community engagement, Public Service will provide information regarding why the gas-fired facilities are needed and how they may be operated on an ongoing basis, answer questions from community members, and encourage the owners of the facilities to coordinate with the engagement. With that background, I'll turn it over to you for your discussion on the settlement agreement, as well as the associated motion for waivers and variances. I'm available for questions if you like, and can also offer a recommendation.
Commissioner Plant, comments, questions, a vote, or a request for a recommendation?
I think a recommendation is fine with me.
Mr. Eden, you want to give us a recommendation?
Sure. Advisors recommend that the Commission approve the settlement agreement without modification. The record shows that the 4 PPAs at issue in this application are a prudent, cost-effective solution to meet short-term resource adequacy. Likewise, the quarterly demand response reporting and the time of use provisions in the settlement agreement help ensure that stakeholders and the Commission will be better able to evaluate demand side reductions going forward, including during the company's next ERP proceeding. Finally, advisors agree with CEO's settlement testimony regarding the provisions in the settlement agreement regarding DI communities and recommend approval of these provisions. And finally, in connection with the approval of the settlement agreement, advisors recommend that the Commission approve the associated motion for waivers and variances for the reasons set forth in Public Services settlement testimony.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I agree with the recommendation, and I just would like to say I appreciate all the work that the settling parties did to come together on this, and I think this is a great solution. It's an interim solution, sort of, as we fully develop our DR and demand side capabilities, as well as, you know, as we're working through this next ERP. We have some, you know, short-term PPAs here that get us through that gap period before the next ERP. I think it's a good solution.
Commissioner Gellman?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Eden. I agree. I'm fine with approving the settlement agreement and appreciate the work to get here, and also kind of appreciate the position we're in with trying to ensure resource adequacy and these plants really providing what seems like the best short-term avenue to get there. That being said, maybe a little bit of commentary about some of the settlement's features. With regard to demand response, I appreciate the features that are in here, but I did, of course, just want to mention, like, this isn't, I think, the entire universe of ambition that the commission has for demand response. I think that's clear, but these appear to be prudent next steps, is what I would say. Prudent and obvious kind of next steps. But the commission has kind of repeatedly articulated our ambition for demand response and demand side resources to be much more ambitious than just the next steps presented here. So I just wanted to kind of put that in context, that these are reasonable next steps, but the company should continue to move forward with an entire suite of demand response analysis as we move forward and have articulated in other proceedings. Also, with regard to the DI communities, unfortunately here, I think we're in a position where, as I stated, these plants really present the best short-term solution to moving forward. I certainly hope that the engagement they'll be doing with the local communities will include listening to those communities and understanding the priorities and interests of those communities as we move forward. In addition to just explaining to them some of the company's position on this situation. I wasn't quite sure by the settlement language, so just want to make sure that that really provides a meaningful opportunity for those communities to engage, especially as we move forward with further rounds of resource planning to ensure that we understand the priorities of those communities and how they best fit in to this situation, especially given the commission's desires to include equity in all of our decision making. We need to ensure that that's really a robust and two-way communication in terms of stakeholder engagement. So just wanted to add that.
And Commissioner Gilman, would you like some language in the final order flagging the DR issues and the low income community issues? Would you like that in the order, or are you wanting to just stand on your oral comments?
Mr. Eden, what do you think? Do you think we can articulate in that way? I don't intend to offer this as a modification to the settlement agreement, but more kind of providing some of the commission's view of these issues as they continue to evolve.
Yeah, I believe that we could draft a commission decision that makes clear that we're not modifying the settlement agreement, but we're flagging these areas of interest for the parties and the company moving forward.
Okay.
Appreciate it. And I support the addition of that language, and we just echo both of your comments. Greatly appreciate the company's leadership in locking in these resources, and finding a way to meet our short-term capacity needs at reasonable cost. And also thanks to the settling parties for working out their differences and helping move this forward in a timely way. So nice job to all. Commissioner Plant, are you okay with the language additions proposed by Commissioner Gilman?
Enthusiastically.
I don't know that there's a separate category for enthusiastic support, but if there is, so noted. And I think that can be an ABC decision, Mr. Eden, granting the joint motion for variances and to approve the settlement agreement. So thank you.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 23A-0361G, Mr. Greenberg, Black Hills DSM strategic issues for the gas side.
Yes, good morning, commissioners. I'm Dan Greenberg of your advisory staff. On July 5th of this year, Black Hills Colorado Gas, or BHG, filed a combined application for approval of its DSM and strategic issues plan for the years 2024 and 2025. As proposed, it would establish annual energy savings goals of about 97,600 decatherms, which is approximately 0.4% of the company's 2021 sales and about 61% of the annual goal established by the settlement agreement that the commission approved in the company's previous DSM plan proceeding. The DSM plan also proposes a peak gas savings goal of 727 decatherms annually. BHG's proposed budget is $5 million in 2024, rising to $5.3 million in 2025. This compares to budgets of 5.0, 5.2, and 5.3 million over the last 3 years. The company's proposed portfolio has a projected modified TRC of 1.56. Each individual program, other than the income qualified program, also projects a modified TRC value greater than 1.0. Staff, UCA, and CEO have filed notices of intervention by right, and Energy Outreach Colorado has filed a motion for permissive intervention. Due to the commissioner's existing and foreseeable workload, advisors recommend that the commission deem the application complete and refer this case, including EOC's motion for permissive intervention, to an ALJ by minute entry.
Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. Commissioner Plant,
I support that.
Commissioner Gilman.
I agree with your recommendation, Mr. Greenberg. I have maybe a couple questions for you. Hopefully you're prepared to address them. Sorry. Does Black Hills in its application take up any of the sorts of issues we discussed in public services application around the future of some of the incentives and strategically what that should look like moving forward?
Not explicitly. I will note that it does propose to continue incentives for efficient gas appliances.
Okay, I hope, for consistency purposes, I would hope that that's a topic that comes up so we can have some level of consistency among the gas utilities in terms of how that's being approached as we move into the future in these strategic proceedings. Also, is there any discussion or proposal on any sort of on-bill finance? I know this is for the gas system rather than the electric system, but we also discussed that a bit in the public service filing in terms of potentially really effective programming to help reach some of the most vulnerable customers for equipment upgrades, different building shell upgrades, things like that.
I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure there is no discussion of that in the plan, the application, or any of the testimony. I don't recall any discussion of on-bill financing in the application.
Okay, yeah, if it's not there, it's there. Probably just oral comment flagging interest in some areas that were explored in previous strategic issues proceedings on the gas side that I think it would be really helpful to understand at the conclusion of this proceeding as it relates to Black Hills Gas.
I agree with the recommendation as well. So thank you, Mr. Greenberg.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 23M-0234G, the Public Service Company Gas Infrastructure Plan. Mr. Mendelson, bringing this back from our discussion at the technical conference on Monday.
Yes, good morning, commissioners. I'm Mike Mendelson of your advisory staff. On Monday this week, the commissioners conducted a technical conference on Public Services Gas Infrastructure Plan, or GIP. The plan was submitted as part of an informational docket 23M-0234G on May 18th, pursuant to new gas rules finalized earlier in the year. Initial comments to the company's filing were received Wednesday and Thursday of last week. Reply comments are due on September 1st. Public comment hearings have not yet been scheduled, but would likely take place in the weeks after that. During the technical conference, several company personnel briefed the commission and answered questions regarding various aspects of the company's filing, including the list of projects and overall investment reviewed by the company's gas infrastructure plan, components of the cost benefit and non-pipeline analysis, and the overall complexity of pulling the filing together given the recent finalization of the rules and emergence of this process. Also during the conference, the commission indicated potential interest in following up with written questions to be discussed at this weekly meeting. Advisors developed a draft list of initial questions for your consideration and distributed that to each of you. I'll now pass it over to you to discuss issuance of a question set or other procedural items.
So thank you, Mr. Mendelson, for quickly turning around a list of questions. I'm generally fine with the questions and set back some red lines, consolidating the questions, simplifying them and adjusting the tone. So that's where I'm at. Commissioner Plant, any thoughts? Take this where you will.
Yeah, no, one thing that I don't think we discussed that I would like to see the company address is an issue that CEO brought up in their comments about system mapping, and I think it came up in a couple of the different comments that we received. But they had a Synapse report that they were referring to that pointed to the importance and the value of system mapping, and I would love to see the company comply with that request as it's outlined on page 20 of their comments.
I support that request to you, Commissioner Gilman. If you could let us know if you're okay with Commissioner Plant's request, and any other thoughts, comments you want to share, but hopefully less than 50.
Fewer than 50, but not 0. Commissioner Plant, are you looking for the information on system mapping? You want that provided like within a couple weeks in this proceeding, or is that something you're looking to include in the next filing?
I don't know to what extent they have to start from scratch, or to what extent they have this and it just wasn't included in their testimony. So what I'd just like to see them address it going forward. I think ideally it's something that would be a part of this proceeding. But again, as with a previous decision that we made, I don't want to just bog them down with stuff that's associated with this proceeding that would take them away from a variety of other things. If it's something that they have that they could provide, I think that would be really valuable.
Okay,
And-
so perhaps we've raised a question about, is this currently available, and or what's the effort to make it be available within the time frame for this proceeding? Just so we can sort out if we can get it included here or not.
Yeah, ideally, and then if not, definitely in the next proceeding.
Okay, got it. I'm fine with that. With regard to the first couple questions proposed are essentially in reference to table 2, which showed the expected expenditure through 2028. I think it is. I don't have the table in front of me. Showing the 4 different broad categories and the expected annual investment. And the first few questions here are looking at essentially, should we have them reproduce table 2 to show kind of different dollar thresholds in terms of what that would net for projects being presented. And I got to be honest, I'm very unclear from essentially what the company said Monday and from the filing, if that is the main problem, like the actual budget we put for the planned project, or if the issue is more the company's budget and planning processes and the extent to which projects are essentially immature in that planning process, and therefore the company is just choosing not to include them. I certainly understood it to be at least some proportion both, and I'm very unclear what proportion both. So instead of just simply kind of having them reproduce table 2 under different circumstances, my gut would be to look at table 2 and have the company be able to clearly indicate for each project category the estimated dollar value and number of projects each year that would have fallen into those buckets if the dollar threshold was 2 to 3 million, 1 to 2 million, or this planning issue, which I understand to potentially be the biggest bucket, but I'd really like clarity on that in terms of what is the reason such a little percentage of actual anticipated future capital expenditures are showing up. And so just to me, as the questions were, it didn't kind of answer that main question or solve that main, what are we missing that's failing to net these projects? And so if they could instead articulate what the estimated dollar value and number of projects would be under each of those circumstances, then I think we could better understand really where the issue lies and why so few projects are showing up and feeding through to the GIP. You know, certainly I agree with many of the comments we've seen that, you know, the GIP doesn't necessarily live up to its, I think, our expectation of it if we really fail to get a meaningful amount of the company's capital investment represented so that we can really evaluate those projects in a proactive way before rate cases, like was the plan. You know, what we're seeing here is a very small percentage represented. So maybe I'll let you guys comment on that before I move on, but a slightly more holistic look at really understanding what the problem is and why so few projects are showing up.
No, I appreciate that. And I tried to put a little bit of language in along those lines, but appreciate the broader perspective and support it, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I support that as well.
And Mr. Mendelson, is that clear enough for you? Or I'm just struggling whether this is going to be an ABC or TBC decision. So given the time, maybe, well, we'll see. I guess we can talk about deadlines and everything else at the end of the conversation. But do you have a clear sense of what this would take, Mr. Mendelson?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe we can consolidate the question in the way Commissioner Gilman explained.
Thank you. Keep going, Commissioner Gilman.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. There's a question on here regarding please explain all assumptions on the company's NPA analyses, including whether the negative salvage value of pipelines are included for the purposes of the CBA. The company stated unequivocally they're not included. So I don't think we need to re-ask that question. We could ask the first half of it, but the second half was already asked and answered in the technical conference, and I didn't think it was ambiguous. So to the extent we can simplify that, I see no need to re-ask that question unless you all see a need to. For what you listed as, I think, the 7th question, Mr. Mendelson, please explain the connection between the stage gate planning and construction date. And I would kind of expound on that to include and the typically expected timeline of the stage gate planning and each phase as it relates to the project kickoff. I think that's what I'm the least clear on. You know, what is the typical expected timeline that things move through the stage gate process, especially as we move up toward that actual construction kickoff, because I found that fairly confusing in the project detail sheet.
Yeah, understood.
For the 9th, I think it's the 9th one, please provide more detailed calculations and associated testimony regarding how the forecasted emissions rates for electric usage are calculated and how these relate to the emissions reductions anticipated in the 2021 ERP CEP. And I don't know if we want to include this in the question or not, but I'll just kind of reiterate what I was seeing. The emissions rates in the CBA inputs show about a 30% drop in emissions rates roughly from 2023 to 2030. Whereas when I looked at bulk reduction expectations from the ERP phase 1, it appeared to show closer to 60% drop in the same time frame. So that's kind of the disparity or understanding that we'd really like to gain with that question, rather than an overly broad explanation of where they came from. I'd like them to address if there is any difference or disparity, which I think your question largely got. I just wasn't sure if it was helpful to for me to explain further where those numbers came from that I was looking at. I don't know if you all have any interest, but you know, we heard some discussion on the potential for gas, mountain gas project, and the company indicated that they are currently doing outreach and investigating non-pipeline alternatives in that area, but they also indicated that they have a current need in that area. So I wasn't sure if you all want to get better insight into the best way for the commission to stay apprised of the outreach and activities going on related to that project. as part of this, since it doesn't appear in the GIP at all, it's hard to understand how we'll really have much of an idea what exact outreach and NPA is being evaluated for that project until there's some sort of filing specifically related to the project.
What do you think about just asking the company to find a way to keep us informed instead of requiring an explicit filing in this case, or are you trying to keep the parties informed? What exactly would you like to see?
I'm trying to figure it out. I mean, in an ideal world, my expectation was the project was going to show up in the GIP, right? It's an expected capacity need where they're doing a non-pipeline analysis currently. So, I expected somewhat similar view to what we're seeing of other projects in terms of NPA and what stakeholder analysis or stakeholder outreach was done. So I guess for the time being, perhaps we ask for, an update in 90 days or something from the conclusion of the GIP on what's the status of the outreach and NPA analysis, just so we can understand. My understanding was it was potentially a significant investment if the actual infrastructure investment was followed through on. So I think it's just important to have some sort of view of where we go from here and what the commission understands about what's going on with that project.
And that's your preference, as opposed to trying to see something maybe simpler in this case at this time. I guess given the timelines, it's probably right.
I mean, I think we can more or less we're going to have another technical conference, I think, in September, so we can ask again for the current status, but how do we kind of stay apprised as it moves forward as to what the status is more my question. So I'm thinking 90 days after the GIP's done, we try and get an update on the stakeholder outreach and NPA.
I'm just wondering, could we ask for, a quarterly update on the NPA projects and just have it so it's ongoing, just keeping us apprised of where the NPA projects are in general?
Maybe every 6 months or something.
Okay. I mean, that's not necessarily something we'd have to figure out until the end of this proceeding, kind of as an outcome, but I agree with you to the extent that it's a new approach, and it's important for us to understand how quick uptake is happening, kind of what is really going on the ground to make these NPAs feasible, and move forward. Perhaps that's a route. It's just we might have to explicitly include that project since it is not necessarily included as part of the GIP. But I'm not sure that's outside the realm of possibility. So if you are fine with that approach, we don't necessarily need to ask the question now. It would be helpful maybe in comments from other stakeholders to understand how they think the commission could stay apprised of projects like that don't appear in the GIP, but are certainly similar.
Yeah, I would support just dealing with this in the final order. I think that's the right place for it.
Okay, no worries. Two issues we talked about during the technical conference a bit: mandatory relocations and new business. The company indicates they are not necessarily in control of the timeline of these types of projects and are generally unaware of them until relatively soon before, but I'm not necessarily clear in terms of what is their normal lead time and understanding that these projects are coming, from understanding they're coming to executing on the project. So I don't know if you all think it would be reasonable for us to better understand the historical annual expenditures for the past 5 years and the average lead time from when the company is alerted to the need for a project to the beginning of construction for mandatory relocation and new business, just so we can get a better understanding of how the life cycle of those projects typically goes and how that relates to the capital expenditure budgets we're looking at.
And you're talking totals?
Totals for mandatory relocations and new business annually for the past 5 years. I think that'll just give us a better universal sense of what is going on here in terms of capital investments and how long they typically know.
Should we just ask for it for all 4 categories?
Yeah, the second question might be a little harder to answer for the other categories in terms of when they're alerted to the need for a project. These are being driven by someone else,
I'm just talking about the underlying data.
I think that's fine. You know, it probably exists elsewhere, so it might be helpful to have it in one spot. But the specific question about the timeline of when they're alerted to the need for a project to when the construction's kicked off is specific to the mandatory relocations and new business.
Commissioner Plant,
Yeah, I support that.
Commissioner
Let me
Gilman.
see. Sorry, let me get to my next one. So the company may be planning on following up on this anyway. This is something we saw up here in comments, but the company did not address either all electric new construction or gas demand response as part of the NPA portfolio that they would consider in terms of how to offset specifically future growth for capacity expansion projects. And I would certainly be curious for the company to indicate why they didn't consider those as feasible NPA, feasible parts of an NPA portfolio, especially given that all electric new constructions generally been considered in other proceedings to be essentially the low-hanging fruit of electrification. And during the technical conference, Mr. Martz discussed the company's interest in driving toward peak hour reductions on the gas system, which would go straight toward something like gas demand response. So I'd be interested in hearing why those aren't included as part of an NPA portfolio approach.
Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I mean, I support that. I think that this also feeds into, you know, the whole consideration of IRA, because there are some pretty substantial incentives for new construction to be done all electric. And I think that we're going to see increasing uptake of those incentives. And I was a little surprised to see that they had not considered any IRA impact. And so I think, you know, I think that understanding why new construction isn't included as a potential NPA, and also, you know, how their projections aren't really aligning with various different federal incentives, as well as, you know, state climate objectives. I mean, it all seem to be a real gap to me in what they've submitted.
I'm supportive of that too.
On the area of the hydrogen blending demonstration project that was provided, we didn't get to any questions on that in the technical conference. I'd appreciate if the company could articulate any specific objectives they have related to the hydrogen blending demonstration projects, and also if the company's identified any timelines and deliverables that they expect to be associated with the learning objectives from that effort.
Do we need to be looking at that elsewhere, maybe in the clean heat plan? That specific pilot may be tough in this case. Any thoughts on the right venue?
To me,
Yeah.
you know, I think it's unclear, especially since this GIP's not fully adjudicated. They're not going to come out of this with approval per se for this, and I'll be specific, they call it a demonstration project, not a pilot. I think there might be some, we've gotten on them about the difference in the past before, so I want to be specific. I don't know. I think this is a very straightforward, relatively harmless question, even if the actual litigation of this takes place elsewhere, as they're communicating as a demonstration project to help the company learn. I'd just like to better understand what the expected learnings are and what's like the timeline and venue for providing, you know, reporting out on those learnings. So we can address it in clean heat. I'll be honest, I don't know if this exact project is referenced in clean heat. I'd have to go there to see. Yeah. So we can follow up on it there. At the same time, I think this question persists no matter if they answer it here or there.
I mean, my preference is to get it answered there. I think it's a more appropriate forum, and they've already raised it. But I think that question, you know, I just would prefer not to open the door to have that get, you know, I don't know, fought over, whatever the right term is here. I don't know, Commissioner Plant, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit, I don't quite understand what the process is for the establishment of demonstration projects like that, if that requires commission approval, or if they were going to ask us for commission approval. I would note that, you know, all the comments that I read were fairly, felt like it was a little premature to go through with that project. But putting it in the clean heat proceeding, I think is appropriate. But I don't know if they're planning on doing this before then anyway. So I'm not quite sure what our role is in the demonstration project.
I think it's a very open question. Mr. Mendelson, any guidance?
Not really. No, I think I don't believe that this will take place sooner than the clean heat plan will be adjudicated. But I don't have a strong opinion.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it's going to play out. I mean, they list construction is starting, I think it's September, October.
I think it's been delayed in 2024.
Okay. I'm fine with talking about it in the clean heat. You know, something related to clean hydrogen, though, that does fit squarely in the GIP was in the existing system assessment portion of the rules, which is 4553 D2. The commission requested the company to essentially do a proactive review of its system in terms of hydrogen compatibility, especially to identify any materials or areas known to be incompatible with clean hydrogen. And in that section of their plan, the company essentially claimed little knowledge about the distribution network's compatibility with hydrogen blending, providing no data on the components or portions of the system known to be incompatible with safely carrying concentrations of hydrogen up to 20%. So given that they've already, you know, mentioned or have plans for a demonstration project, you know, I certainly have a question for the company in terms of when they expect they will provide an assessment at the level indicated by the rule, so that we can understand the broader system's capabilities with regard to hydrogen compatibility. So I don't know if you all see that as an important thing to follow up on at this point in time, but we didn't necessarily net any data from that question that was posed in the GIP rules, but is specifically related to the idea of introducing hydrogen to the system.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all important questions as it relates to, you know, potential increases in leakage, or also, you know, the type of material that the pipes are made of, I think is impacted a great deal by hydrogen. So it does directly go to the infrastructure itself. But I'm not sure if we're asking for something specific, or
well, the rules generally ask for something specific, but nothing specific was provided. So my suggestion would be to just reference that rule section and to inquire with the company as to when the company anticipates they will provide a system assessment of that level.
Yeah, I support that.
As do I.
One other question. This is it. I didn't get to 50 as promised. But the company discusses in their plan utilizing the 1 in 30 year probabilistic temperature for capacity planning needs. And I was just hoping that we might be able to have the company provide trending for the past 20 years, showing the company's probabilistic temperature outputs for each geographic area. They show kind of discrete temperatures for different geographic areas. So I'll let them use what they use, don't reinvent the wheel, but trying to understand if the probability of a 1 in 30 year cold temperature is changing or has changed as we look at the last 20 years. for each of those geographic zones.
Seems like a sensible request to me, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I think that would be really informative.
So I guess, Mr. Mendelson, it seems like we've expanded the scope of this pretty significantly. I'm wondering if we need to somehow adjust the deadlines or the process. Do we want to give the company some time to respond and do another round of comments, or I'm not sure exactly where we're at.
Right, we have the reply comments are currently due September 1. If we ask the company to respond to these questions, perhaps we give them 2 to 3 weeks and push back the reply comments an additional set of weeks so that they can review these responses as well and incorporate that. So that may be appropriate at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's reasonable to ask the company to respond by September 1st. And are you thinking, Mr. Mendelson, I guess Commissioner Goman, would you see this as an ABC order or a TBC? I think that influences the timing too.
I don't necessarily think it has to be TBC. I'd be happy to send Mr. Mendelson my verbiage on the things I've offered.
Commissioner Plant, would you be okay with an ABC order?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think that some of the information actually might be in, was it E3, the E3 report that they did in advance of this. So it might not be, starting from scratch. I think they've got some of this information. But yeah, ABC.
And are you guys both okay with Mr. Mendelson working out, in consultation with council, a procedural schedule that makes sense? Are you guys okay delegating that to Mr. Mendelson?
Yeah, and we were planning a second technical conference, which would happen. So if I'm reading it right, the company will respond to these questions. Then we'll have another set of comments from stakeholders. Then we'll have a second technical conference, right?
I wouldn't
that
call it a
order would stay.
technical conference. I'd call it more like a public hearing. Maybe with panels. So there'd be like panels. We'd take comments from the general public. So I would see it as significantly different than the first one. Mr. Mendelson?
Yeah, I was envisioning personally that it would be a public comment hearing. So we would allow anyone from the public, but also have in-depth questions to members of the parties. And perhaps we could just set up a panel so it's a little more easier and more efficient to run.
So sort of like what we did in the rulemaking at various phases.
That's fine. I don't know why I got in my head. It was the preferred nomenclature was technical conference. Took that one too far. Yeah, that seems fine. And that's the right order, I think. So we'll just have to negotiate calendars to make it work.
All right, Mr. Mendelson, I think you got an ABC decision consistent with this conversation and the flexibility to set dates. And my only other request while we're still on this is just be sensitive in the order to the fact that we may not be asking the questions in the right way. This is the first GIP, and just give the company some room to try and address the spirit of the request as well as the letter of the law. So if you can just include some language along those lines in the tone, where it's just like, this is not us demanding, ABC. This is trying to work together to figure this stuff out over time. So I don't know, Commissioner Plan, if you're all right with that context and perspective.
Yep.
Commissioner Goman.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Mendelson.
Okay, thank you. Just to confirm, so we're thinking potentially 3 weeks for the company's response. Does that sound about right to amount of time for the company to respond to this set of questions? And then another
Yeah, and then another 2 or 3 weeks for, you know, whatever
for
cross
comments.
yeah.
And then the public comment hearing in the week or two to follow.
Yeah, so probably like mid-October.
Okay.
Maybe end of October.
Okay, that works. Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Mr. Mendelson. Proceeding number 23V-0381G, Mr. Gomez, Atmos Black Hills request for a variance.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. In this matter, on July 21st, Atmos Energy Corporation and Black Hills Colorado Gas filed a petition for a variance from Gas Utility Rule 4602H. Joint petitioners request either a partial variance delaying the filing of their initial gas purchase incentive mechanism applications until 90 days after Public Service Company files its initial GPIM, consistent with the filing processes set out in Rule 4602, or they request a full variance if the Commission ultimately grants Public Services requests for a full variance in that proceeding, which is 23V-0241G. The joint petitioners note that the recently modified GCA rules include a new requirement for natural gas utilities to file a GPIM to establish a gas cost benchmark using market indices and apply a risk-sharing mechanism pursuant to Rule 4601Q. The GCA rules also introduced several new terms and definitions related to the GPIM. Those rules became effective April 14th of this year, and the modified GCA rules adopted a staggered approach for those gas utilities to file GPIM applications. Under that process, Public Service was to file its GPIM 2 months after the new GCA rules took effect, with Atmos and Black Hills filing their GPIM applications on September 23rd. They note, the joint petitioners note that Senate Bill 23291, which was enacted this year, impacts gas utilities by requiring that utilities file a gas price risk management plan by November 1, 2023 to level or reduce the volatility of fuel costs that are recovered pursuant to the utilities gas cost adjustment filings, and that has been codified at 40-3-120 subsection 1A, and that the Commission initiate a rulemaking in order to align the financial incentives of investor-owned electric or gas utilities with the interests of the utilities customers regarding incurred fuel costs. Joint petitioners feel that in future proceedings and in the future rulemaking, these statutory directives may conflict with or overlap with the Commission's existing rules regarding GPIMs. I would note that by decision number C23-0456, issued on July 18th, the Commission granted Public Services requests under similar circumstances for a temporary waiver of its June 13th GPIM filing deadline. That temporary waiver was to be in place pending a final decision on whether a permanent waiver was appropriate. Because the GPIM requirements in SB 23291 both work to align incentives and introduce risk sharing for commodity costs, joint petitioners are concerned that an overlap of issues that may be litigated in the GPIM application proceeding, and that will be addressed in the final incentive and risk management mechanism rulemaking. The joint petitioners also argue that it's possible that the rulemaking requirements of SB 23291 could supplant the GPIM application filing requirements in rules 4602H and 4607. As a result, joint petitioners request one of two variances. They request either a partial variance delaying the filing of their initial GPIM applications until 90 days after Public Service files its initial GPIM, consistent with the staggered filing requirements in Rule 4602, or they request a full variance if the Commission ultimately grants Public Service's request for a full variance in proceeding 23V-0241G. This matter is on today for a determination on whether to grant those variances or not. I'm ready for my recommendation if you have any, unless you have any questions.
No, if you could give your recommendation, that'd be great. And we'll come back with any questions, comments, or about.
Okay, my recommendation is to grant the request for the partial or temporary variance. Given that the process is outlined in the proceedings contemplated under Commission rules, that joint petitioners are to file their applications 90 days after Public Service files its initial GPIM. And given that the Commission previously approved Public Service's request for a temporary variance, but have not yet determined whether to grant it a permanent variance from filing the GPIM, I think it's most logical for you to grant the request for a partial or temporary variance here until there is certainty over these filings and how you wish to proceed.
Commissioner Plant.
I approve that recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman.
I agree.
As do I, and that can be an ABC order consistent with your recommendation, Mr. Gomez. So thank you.
Thank you.
Going back to the first issue, proceeding number 22 AL-0530E, Public Service Company of Colorado, Phase 1 electric rate case. Ms. Friedman.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ellie Friedman of your advisory staff, and with me this morning, also from your advisory group, are Mike Mendelson, Ron Davis, and Richard McAllister, and also your Commission Counsel, Ruthie Harper and Alex Acera. So before we present the issues before you for determination today in this proceeding, I'll give you a little bit of background. Public Service filed this rate case on November 30th, 2022, requesting a net increase to base rate revenue of $262.3 million. This included some $50 million in costs currently collected through rate adjustment mechanisms, which would be rolled into base rates. And those mechanisms were the transmission cost adjustment, the TCA, and the purchase power cost adjustment, the PCCA. Public Service is currently charging electric customers a general rate schedule adjustment, the GRSA, of 10.9% to augment its base rate revenue collections. The requested increase in revenues would have raised the GRSA to 28.17%. In this November filing, Public Service stated that the primary drivers of the requested rate increase fall into three broad categories of costs: $2.6 billion of capital investment since the last rate case, increases in operations and maintenance expenditures, and the requested increases in the company's cost of capital. Public Service proposed a 2023 test year with about $1.2 billion of the $2.6 billion of investments to be completed by December 31st, 2022, and the remaining $1.4 billion of projected investments to be completed within calendar year 2023. Public Service sought an authorized ROE of 10.25% and a WACC of 7.45%. The decision, or by decision C-22-833, the Commission set the matter for hearing, suspended the 28.17% GRSA from taking effect, and consolidated the rate case with proceeding number 22 AL-0478E, the company's 2023 TCA filing. Interveners in this combined proceeding include Commission trial staff, the Colorado Office of Utility Consumer Advocate, that's the UCA, Colorado Energy Office, CO, City of Boulder, Colorado Energy Consumers, CEC, Coalition for Community Solar Access, CCSA, Climax Molybdenum Company, City and County of Denver, Federal Executive Agencies, the FEA, the Kroger Company, Molson Coors, Board of Waterworks of Pueblo, and Walmart. On June 20th, Public Service filed a settlement on behalf of the parties with Public Service, trial staff, UCA, CEC, CO, FEA, Molson Coors, and Walmart joining all parts of the settlement. Climax does not oppose the settlement, and Denver, CCSA, Kroger, and Pueblo take no position on the settlement. Boulder opposes the settlement. The terms of the settlement can be broken down into parts. Most of the provisions relate to the calculation of the revenue requirement. And they are the settlement test year ending December 31st, 2022, valued on a year-end basis, an authorized ROE of 9.3% and a WACC of 6.95%. O&M expenses in the settlement revenue requirement based on historical 2022 booked amounts with certain known and measurable adjustments. Recoverable rate case expenses for this case and the new phase 2 rate case capped at a combined $2 million to be amortized over 36 months starting in September. And the revenue requirement also reflects an overall reduction of $5 million in consideration of the various proposals made by the settling parties in this proceeding. The settlement further addresses the amortization of regulatory assets, pre-existing trackers and deferrals and new deferrals, certain gain on sale matters, water rights and contract matters, and a further commitment to stakeholder work to address affordability, ongoing system planning, and rate making and utility performance incentive matters. The settlement calls for a revenue neutral shift from base rate recovery to rider recovery of all demand side management expenses, a move of about $89.5 million out of rate base. This results in a tripling of the DSMCA on customer bills so that a residential customer's bill would reflect a shift from 0.002 cents per kilowatt hour to 0.006 cents per kilowatt hour for the DSMCA. The settlement also calls for the resolution of the 2023 TCA with recovery of some $14.8 million over 4 months, which would be September through December of this year. The parties left 2 issues for the Commission's determination. The first is whether to adopt a proposal to defer the recovery of certain costs associated with coal-fired plants, Public Services retiring, which is the coal cost deferral. If the Commission approves the coal cost deferral proposal, the additional revenue requirement will be about $48 million. Without the coal cost deferral, the revenue requirement increase would be about $97 million. These amounts are calculated in the same manner that the company used to arrive at its $263 million net increase sought in the initial rate case filing. The parties also asked the Commission to resolve the question of whether the TCA should change beginning with the 2024 TCA. In terms of rates, if the Commission approves the settlement, customers would be charged a GRSA of 0.15% if the coal cost deferral is approved. Again, this small amount is largely the result of the large shift of the DSM costs to the DSMCA. If the coal cost deferral is not approved, the GRSA will be 2.74%, also reflecting the shift of the DSM costs into base rates, from base rates to the DSMCA. When the 4-month 2023 TCA impacts are included in the determination of bill impacts, residential customers on average would see bills increase by 2.9% for the next 4 months with the coal cost deferral, or 4.4% for the next 4 months without the coal cost deferral. Boulder states that it opposes the settlement and it asks the Commission to reject or modify certain settlement terms. However, Boulder also states that there are provisions within the settlement that it supports or takes no issue with. Boulder principally objects to the ROE of 9.3% and the WACC of 6.95%, arguing that they are unnecessarily high relative to the company's peers and given the risks incurred by the company. Boulder also has concerns as to the leadership and directives of the stakeholder working group to address energy insecurity. The Commission conducted a hearing in this case, July 10th through the 12th, and closing statements of position were filed by Public Service, Trial Staff, CEC, Climax, Boulder, and Denver. With that, advisors are prepared to present three main decision points before the commission this morning. That is, first, whether to adopt the coal cost deferral proposal. Second, whether to approve the settlement and the associated rate increase. And third, whether to modify the TCA beginning in 2024. But before that, I'll pause so the commissions can discuss how you might want to proceed this morning.
I think that makes a lot of sense to me and would suggest just jumping into the coal depreciation expense deferral discussion. But let me check with my colleagues. Commissioner Plant, would that work for you?
Yep.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yes.
All right, Ms. Friedman.
To the coal cost deferral proposal, in his answer testimony, UCA witness Chris Neal proposed rate mitigation in this proceeding by deferring costs, mostly the depreciation expense, of coal-fired power plants recently addressed in proceeding number 22A0515E. These plants are scheduled for retirement with those costs subject to securitization beginning in 2031. UCA's proposal would defer annual depreciation costs and add those costs to the future securitization as approved for the net plant costs in proceeding 22A0515E. UCA estimated that this deferral would decrease the revenue requirement in this proceeding by $40 to $50 million. In rebuttal testimony, Public Service took no position on UCA's proposal, but requested that if the commission were to grant the deferral, the unrecovered balances should continue to earn a rate equal to the company's WACC. Public Service also requested clarification that the depreciation expense was being deferred, not ceasing altogether, and that deferred amounts would be net of any applicable allowance for deferred income taxes. The company also requested a plan for future recovery of the deferred depreciation expense through retail rates, as the deferral is a mechanism intended to provide near-term benefits to customers. Public Service also asked for flexibility to modify the deferral and recovery in future proceedings. Parties supporting the coal cost deferral proposal that proposed that Public Service would record the deferral, primarily the coal plant depreciation expenses, as a regulatory asset to be included in rate base, earning a return at the company's authorized WACC until the balances are securitized or until the commission authorizes amortization of the net plant values for the assets and those balances have been fully amortized. The balance of the regulatory asset would be added to the net plant amounts in a bundled securitization as part of the future financing application under the Clean Energy Plan and coal cost recovery settlements. If the proposal accepted, the company's total retail revenue requirement increase, as I said, would be $48 million. Without this proposal, the increase would be about $97 million. And these figures comport with UCA's original estimate in its answer testimony. Trial staff of the commission opposes the coal cost deferral on 4 grounds. First, that the proposal is a significant departure from rate-making principles, including the principle that rate-based plant reflects plant in service and is used and useful. Second, that the record is insufficient as to how the proposal would work and its impact on future rates. Third, that there's potential for intergenerational inequity because current ratepayers would not pay for an asset they are using, leaving cost recovery to future ratepayers when the plants have retired. And fourth, staff suggests that the proposal is an inappropriate response to affordability concerns. Staff contends that unlike the agreement in proceeding number 22A0515E, there is no record in this proceeding that includes analyses and options for the treatment of cost recovery. Staff points out that UCA's proposal was based on a hope that Public Service would provide annual costs to support the proposal, but staff notes that there is no analysis, modeling, or work papers in this proceeding through which the commission can understand and evaluate the projected rate impacts of the proposal over the life of the regulatory asset, nor to evaluate the net present value of the proposal and how that compares to other possible recovery paths, how plant balances and rate base grow over time through the duration of the deferral, and future bill impacts if the proposal runs its course. Staff contends there is no guarantee and no evidentiary basis to support the rate impacts over time, and that the associated net present value of the proposal would be less than having current ratepayers pay the depreciation costs while the units are in operation. Staff argues that future ratepayers would be required to pay for assets from which they never received service, and questions whether this is in the public interest. Staff acknowledges that affordability is a high priority concern, but argues that there are many unknowns about future utility rates. Staff notes that future ratepayers will be paying billions of dollars for investments in the Colorado Power Pathway and the current ERP, in addition to the non-coal plant costs included in the test year in this phase 1 rate case. Given this, staff argues that it is not possible to know what costs future ratepayers will have to bear, and that deferring additional costs is not appropriate. In a statement of position, staff notes that with this proposal, the company does not reduce base rates, but instead reduces rates today while moving those costs to future ratepayers to pay in full, with current ratepayers paying the WACC return on a higher rate base balance. This amounts to the company receiving the benefit of the WACC return while shifting all risk to future ratepayers. In supporting its proposal, UCA in settlement testimony maintains that deferring costs of the retiring coal plants offers a unique opportunity for the Commission to reduce rates. UCA argues that allowing current ratepayers rate relief is appropriate compensation for jumpstarting the state's decarbonization efforts that will benefit future ratepayers when these power plants are retired. UCA argues that relief for current ratepayers is more important than long-term costs, and that the proposal better aligns cost retiring coal plants with the cost of environmental benefits of the retirements. Public Service contends that there are not intergenerational recovery concerns with the coal plant depreciation deferral because the company will be making significant investments in clean energy transition, benefiting current and future customers. Since future customers will benefit, Public Service asserts they should bear some of the costs associated with early retirement of the coal plants. Furthermore, the company maintains that securitization will mitigate some of the future rate impact. The company argues that the record is sufficient to support the proposal, as long as no modification is made to the settlement on this issue, including the impacts on the settlement revenue requirement. Public Service contends that the Commission will have flexibility in the future to maintain or modify the deferral. So with that background, I'll turn the discussion to the Commission so you can discuss and for your determination as to whether to approve the coal cost deferral.
Thank you, Ms. Friedman. I'll jump first and just say I think the coal plant depreciation expense deferral proposal is a creative concept that could potentially help manage nearer term affordability concerns. And I appreciate UCA and the other parties bringing it forward. At the same time, I tend to agree with staff that the proposal is underdeveloped and that no party provided any net present value analysis, modeling, or work papers in support of the long-term rate impacts. At hearing, company witness Mr. Berman confirmed that there is no analysis on this record comparing the net present value, the projected long-term costs and benefits of this proposal. Although this analysis could be perhaps inferred and pulled from other proceedings, it just doesn't exist on this record in this case. For me, I believe the Commission should apply a duty of care that looks at the net present value of the costs and benefits over time, tests each assumption for accuracy, and evaluates alternative interest rate policy requirement and other scenarios. Given this standard, I don't believe the settling parties provided a sufficient evidentiary basis to find that this proposal on this record is in the public interest. Just a couple more things is Ms. O'Neill outlines in her settlement agreement testimony. I'm also skeptical that the relatively high levels of investment that are occurring now are somehow going to abate later this decade, and that we'll see slower levels of investment in the 2030s. Looking at this utility and the financial incentives that exist under current regulation, it seems more likely that we're going to see continued capital requests on wildfire mitigation, distribution system upgrades, climate adaptation, infrastructure improvements, etc. Finally, I just say that this Commission has generally granted significant deference to the judgment of the parties that support a broad settlement agreement, even when it's not comprehensive and unanimous. But when the settling parties decline to put any meaningful long-term net present value benefit cost analysis into the record, or even worse, argue that there's too much uncertainty to even bother to do the analysis, perhaps our deference has gone too far. So for all these reasons, I'm not willing to approve the coal plant depreciation expense deferral in this case on this record. So Commissioner, and take it wherever you'd like.
Oh, will you regret saying that? Yeah,
So far I haven't, but I may.
No, I agree. I agree with your comments. I think staff's arguments were very persuasive, and even more basically, I think that deferring current costs onto future ratepayers is fiscally irresponsible, and so I think there would need to be a very good argument of why that is a reasonable course to take, and I didn't hear it here. There's one part of their argument that did kind of bug me, so I want to address that if I could, and not to take us too far off course, but just earlier this week in Wyoming, there was a court case that said that we have a responsibility to provide a clean and healthy environment to future generations, and they have that in their constitution. I don't know that we do, but I'm proud to say that I think Colorado respects that and has actually taken on that responsibility of providing a clean and healthy environment to future generations. And I'm certainly honored to be on a commission that has had that as a preeminent principle. But we weren't always that way here in Colorado. And, some of the coal plants that we're talking about, the decision to build those was made before we knew better, but some of them weren't. Some of them were made when we did know better. And in fact, at the time when those coal plants were approved, interveners made the argument that there were externality costs and that we were pushing the expense of pollution on future generations, and that we shouldn't do that. And the argument at the time from some of the folks that are supporting this deferral of coal costs was, well, we're not concerned about the future costs of pollution on those people. We want to get the cheapest kilowatt hour we can. And now, we're back in this position where we're saying, well, it's okay to push these costs onto future ratepayers because look at this great improvement in the environment that we're going to be providing for them, and that's going to be to their benefit. And the argument that future generations are going to benefit from our largesse of closing plants when we willfully ignored the emissions impacts on approving plants in the first place is, I think, disingenuous at best and cynical at worst. And I just that argument really bothered me. And so I think we need to be conscious of that fact. I think that it speaks well to the state and the commission that now we do value those externalities. And maybe we're in a little bit easier position because coal is now the most expensive resource and it's much easier for us to make the decisions that we do. But I think we're also making decisions that are in the best interest of future generations, and that's something that we should do. So I agree with your proposal, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate it. I just would have one comment before jumping to Commissioner Gilman, which is, I guess I'm a little less hostile to the underlying concept because if you securitize this stuff in the future, you could have a really low interest rate. So there may be gains available by doing this. It just wasn't demonstrated in any way on this record. So I appreciate all your comments, but would just add that one caveat as we struggle with this stuff moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, the only, I appreciate that, but I think you could probably say that about any expense, right?
Right.
I mean, at some point you have to take on the cost that you have.
Draw the line. Commissioner Gilman.
Well, thanks. I generally find myself agreeing with the two of you for somewhat similar reasons. Look, I appreciate seeing the parties really trying to turn over every rock and understand what we can do to address affordability concerns. But at the end of the day, this wasn't a proposal that was supported well enough to really think that we could sincerely agree that it was in the best interest for ratepayers, because we don't understand the impacts, especially on future ratepayers. And I agree with you, Chairman, in addition to just generally the lack of support and analysis in terms of what the rate impacts look like. I'm not confident necessarily in the premise that the rate of escalation of spending will necessarily slow after 2030. We've seen the company continue to set expectations of significant future capital expenditures, including with investors. And so, not to mention the affordability crisis that we really, I think arguably are still in, and stemmed this winter from significantly elevated natural gas prices. And the gas markets have not shown any inclination to reform or show discipline in terms of regulation. That leads me to think things will become less volatile or costly in the future, especially during future extreme weather events. Clearly, that's something Colorado is trying to take initiative in, addressing the volatility, but some of those volatility plans may actually push some of those costs out into the future to kind of smooth the impact. So, in addition to seeing any rate analysis that was meaningful, I also didn't think I saw meaningful analysis that really that rate of escalation, should significantly be expected to slow or cease after 2030. But I agree with each of you. I don't think it was significantly enough supported for us to approve it in this rate case.
Thank you, Commissioner Gilman. Do you want to keep moving on, Ms. Friedman?
Sure. And in fact, I'm going to turn the discussion to Mike Mendelson. He'll talk about the settlement. There are several decision points within the settlement. So I'll turn it to him for the next presentation.
Mr. Mendelson.
Yes, thank you. Hello, Commissioners. I'm Mike Mendelson of your advisory staff. As Ms. Freeman noted, the settlement had numerous attributes. Boulder opposes the return on equity and weighted average cost of capital aspect of the settlement, so I'll focus on these facets in particular. The company's currently authorized ROE is 9.3%, and its currently authorized WACC is 6.82%. Per the settling parties agreed to retain the current 9.3% ROE, but raise the WACC to 6.95% in recognition of higher average cost of debt. The settlement WACC also retains the company's current capital structure of 55.69% equity, just over 43% long-term debt, and just under 1% short-term debt. As background, in answer testimony, other parties suggested ROE values of 8.7%, 9.0%, 9.3%, and 9.4%. Also, ROE is just one component of the WACC return the company earns on its investments. The other key piece of the WACC calculation is its equity ratio. Boulder contends the settlement results in a higher WACC than currently authorized, which will result in higher customer bills, the potential for higher earnings for public service, and that it will affect modeling results in proceedings such as the electric resource plan. Boulder suggests the commission adopt a ROE of 8.51% based on the argument that that was the company's actual earned return in the 5-year period, 2017 to 2021, and a resulting 6.51% WACC return. Boulder contends such a return is sufficient, as evidenced by the fact the company has increased dividends paid to Excel faster than the rate of inflation. Boulder remarks that 2022 was a year of record Excel energy profits, record customer requests for bill pay assistance, a record amount of customer bill in arrears, and an unprecedented number of ratepayer comments and complaints regarding high bills. Boulder also notes that the company is more profitable than all but one of its proxy group companies. In its SOP, Boulder contends the commission should reject its proposal to limit that if the commission rejects its proposal to limit ROE to 8.51%, the authorized WACC should not exceed the current value of 6.82%, and the ROE must not exceed 9.3%, as approved in the preceding 21A 0317E, the company's last electric rate case. Boulder states this can be achieved by either lowering the equity ratio to 53.2% or by reducing ROE to 9.06% while maintaining the current capital structure. Boulder points to staff statements that the company is financially healthy and refers to company forecasts of its credit metrics, or indicators of financial health as used by bond rating agencies, as required by the commission via supplemental direct testimony. That analysis suggests that even with without any rate increase at all, the company's financial metrics maintain a healthy margin above the 19% threshold for a key credit metric, referred to as cash flow from operations pre-working capital divided by debt. Boulder also argues that the company's exposure to risk is modest given the significant capital investment that has taken place, and that 8 unique cost recovery riders minimize lag and risk of disallowance. Boulder also argued the company's proxy group was inappropriate because it was based on too wide a range of utility capitalization, ranging from $3 billion to $155 billion, when Xcel is at $38 billion, and that the proxy group should really be focused on utilities in the Mountain West region. Finally, Boulder contends that the settlement WACC of 6.95% is higher than the WACC set in 2 recent other cases of Xcel Energy operating companies in Minnesota and South Dakota. Those cases in June resulted in WACC values, respectively, of 6.84% and 6.82%. Public Service and the settling parties responded that Boulder's witness, Mr. Lehrman, did not perform any quantitative analysis regarding his ROE suggestion. Public Service further notes Boulder's proposal is inconsistent with the significant changes in market conditions. Specifically, the 30-year Treasury bond yields have increased by 160 basis points since the company's prior proceeding. Public Service's ROE witness, Ms. Bulkley, also contends she is not aware of any state or federal regulatory commission in the U.S. that sets utility authorized returns based on historical earned returns, and that Boulder's suggestion is inconsistent with the seminal Hope and Bluefield decisions, which require a utility to be given the opportunity to earn a return that is commensurate with investments of similar risk. Public Service further goes that Boulder is not recommending eliminating regulatory lag, the primary cause of under-earning, and that the effect of setting an 8.5% authorized ROE would, if historic test years imposed, in actuality cause an earned return of more like 7.5%. Public Service also argues that recent ROEs awarded to electric utilities in 2023 has averaged 9.76%, and the Boulder's Mountain West proxy group, as proposed, has an average ROE of 9.48%, materially higher than the settlement ROE and nearly a full percentage point higher than the ROE recommended by Boulder. The settling parties contend that Boulder's concerns related to the overall higher WACC are misplaced, which is a direct result of rising interest rates and market conditions. Public Service contends that Boulder's provided no analysis of how its recommendation would impact the company's credit metrics or financial integrity, or how the investment community would perceive it. According to the company, the WACC reflects the capital structure initially recommended by staff and the company, an ROE recommended by UCA, and the company's anticipated actual cost of debt. Other than Boulder, all parties who took a position on the WACC in this case agreed to this outcome, the company states. Staff separately commented that the settlement cost of capital is reasonable. Further, Public Service and settling parties argue that the settlement purposely defines specific ROE and WACC values rather than ranges for a variety of reasons, including the calculation of the accounting term allowance for funds used during construction and to determine taxes payable and overall revenue requirement. The settlement parties comment that the Commission's recent desire for ranges around ROE and equity ratio, stating that replacing these negotiated and agreed upon components with a WACC that could be composed of a range of varying elements may introduce uncertainty into what parties are agreeing to, thereby actively discouraging future settlement resolutions. I'll now pass the baton back to Ms. Friedman to describe Boulder's concerns with Energy and Security Working Group.
Before we do that, should we deliberate on these as a group? I think that might be more efficient. Any thoughts, Ms. Mendelson or Mr. Mendelson or Ms. Friedman?
That works for us, I believe.
Is that okay, Ms. Friedman?
You're meaning you want to you would like the discussion of all of Boulder's issues together, or you wanted to discuss Mr. Mendelson's presentation?
Yeah, I'm wondering if we could talk about the revenue requirement first before getting to the energy security issues.
Sure.
Would that work for you, Commissioner Plant, Commissioner Gilman? You could, yeah, okay, thanks. Well, let me just launch into this and say on the core revenue requirement proposals issues, I want to run an alternative proposal by you both that explores maybe doing a bit more for customers, giving some of the risks associated with upsetting a broad settlement agreement and the fact that I'm still grappling with all this. I'm really just trying to start a conversation and see where you guys are at. So I'm going to go through the whole thing, put a comprehensive proposal in front of you, and then just see where you're at. And please understand, I'm still struggling with it. So on the test year, I support a 2022 historical test year and an end of year approach as agreed to in the settlement. For multiple reasons, I'm struggling to find that the common equity ratio of 55.69%, as said in the settlement agreement, is in the public interest. For one, this record shows that the settlement agreement common equity ratio of 55.69% is well above both the proxy group utility median and average common equity ratios, which were characterized by Ms. Bulkley as being around 53%. Likewise, in this case, the parties put forward common equity ratios ranging from a low of 46% up to a high of just under 56%, a range of almost 10%. Given this wide range, it's not clear to me why the settlement agreement proposes an outcome at the top of the range and specifies the common equity ratio down to 1/100th of a percentage point, despite 3 prior decisions from this commission finding that approach is overly precise. Perhaps most importantly are the affordability concerns raised by hundreds of public comments from customers struggling to pay their energy bills and as echoed in the Boulder settlement agreement testimony. As such, I'm concerned that a 55.69% common equity ratio does not strike an appropriate balance between customer and utility interests. In addition, UCA witness Neal identified over $200 million of cost overruns as against initial estimates on just 8 individual projects, some of which are going into rates under the settlement agreement. Perhaps a lower common equity ratio could maybe create some incentive for a more disciplined approach on invested capital and cost control. Finally, the settlement agreement common equity ratio seems to have ignored this commission's guidance in the prior public service company gas rate case, which was just decided at the end of last year, was fully litigated, had a very similar record to the one in this case, involved the same company, and had a majority of this bench participating. In that gas rate case, this commission found that a common equity ratio close to 56% was too high, and said the actual common equity ratio as a range between 52 and 55%. So for all those reasons, I want to talk to you both about setting the common equity ratio at the exact same range as in the most recent public service company gas rate case, which was 52 to 55%. On ROE, this record, as exemplified by the oral testimony of Ms. Bulkley at hearing, shows that the ROE set in the settlement agreement is well below the national average authorized ROE in the utility proxy group. So weighing all of the evidence on this record, which is again similar to the one in the recent and fully litigated Piesco gas case, for purposes of this proposal, I would follow the precedent set there. In that case, we set the bottom end of the ROE range at the then prevailing authorized rate of return on equity and the top end at 9.5%. So applying that approach here, I'd set the ROE between the current approved level of 9.3 and a top end of 9.5%. For me to set the WACC, I'd use the midpoint of both the proposed ROE and common equity ratios. This approach would materially lower the common equity ratio and somewhat increase the ROE as against the settlement agreement, resulting in a WACC of 6.89%. This would reduce the revenue requirement by just under $12 million as against the settlement proposed historical test year revenue requirement, as shown in the cost of service study provided by Mr. Freitas as hearing exhibit 151, attachment APF-31A. I had one more element on this regarding credit metrics. As I understand Mr. Johnson's testimony, by setting a wide range of potential outcomes on ROE and the common equity ratio, this commission can give the company room to adjust the common equity ratio and debt within the allowed range as long as it keeps the WACC constant to protect the credit rating. To provide additional flexibility in this proposal, I'd like to suggest allowing the company at its discretion and under compelling circumstances to go outside the authorized ROE and common equity ratio ranges to protect the credit rating, again, while keeping the WACC constant. Using the tools provided by the company and based on the evidence in this record, this outcome should result in credit metrics and the type of flexibility for the company that are consistent with the requirements of the rating agency to comfortably maintain the credit rating. Taken as a whole, I believe this alternative better aligns with recent commission guidance, puts in place the same capital structure for both the gas and electric portions of the business, may more equitably balance customer and utility interests, may encourage greater capital discipline, can be structured to avoid concerns with credit downgrades, and is generally more tightly grounded in the actual evidence on this record than the settlement agreement. At the same time, I just say there may be material risks of upsetting a broad settlement agreement that we just need to carefully consider. As Mr. Johnson argued at hearing, perhaps the biggest risk involves how the financial community views the Colorado regulatory environment. Right now, Colorado is seen as a somewhat constructive environment, and if that somehow changed, it could raise capital costs, which is why it may be helpful to keep anything that we do in the same framework as the prior gas rate case that should be baked in that expectation. In addition, there may be process issues as the hearing focused solely on the settlement agreement. There may be timing concerns as the company has the right to put the higher rates in the initial filing into effect in early September. And there may be issues, as Mr. Mendelson mentioned, surrounding incentives to settle future cases. Although I also have offsetting concerns with approving black box settlements. So finally, towards that end, I believe that this alternative largely equity or not altering the cost eligible for TCA cost recovery in this
Chairman,
case.
we lost the beginning of that sentence. Maybe you can go back a bit. You froze.
All right, sorry. Toward that end, I believe that this proposal largely honors the equities in the settlement agreement. Given our discussion on the coal plant depreciation expense deferral, and then I'm leaning toward not altering the cost eligible for TCA cost recovery in this case, both of which provide near-term cash flow for the company compared to the alternatives. I think this proposal generally adheres to the rough balance contained in this settlement agreement. So anyway, sorry for the long-winded presentation. Given that none of this is ideal and the risks associated with a broad settlement agreement, I'm just trying to put forward an alternative for discussion that does something more for customers that we can discuss today. And if this is of interest to you, maybe we could come back and take this up again once we've talked to advisors and counsel and really heard them out. about some of the potential risks. So again, I'm struggling with all this and trying to make up my own mind, but wanted to put forth an alternative to really have the discussion and see where you guys were at. So with that, Commissioner Plant, once again, feel free to put forward your own proposal, react to mine, or take this anywhere you'd like.
Well, yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I appreciated your line of questioning regarding this, and anticipated that maybe it was leading to some sort of a proposal from you at the time, and I appreciate your approach, which I think leads, as you mentioned, directly to a $28 million, I think was your number, reduction.
12.
$12 million reduction. That partially offsets, I think, you mentioned that maybe this, you don't want to shake up the settlement agreement. I think one of the things that we heard from UCA was that they didn't think that the full cost without the full cost deferral was something that they could support anymore. So maybe this is actually helping with the settlement agreement. I don't know. I did have one question. I like your approach of putting in place a hard WACC and then allowing for a range to ensure that you can maintain the credit ratings. But one thing I didn't quite understand. So I think you gave a 52 to 55% equity ratio, and a 9.3 to 9.5 ROE ratio that could be within which you could move around in order to maintain those credit ratings. But then I thought you said something about also allowing the company to go outside of that. So I'm kind of trying to understand what's the purpose of
I guess if the world really turned against them and they could demonstrate compelling circumstances, it could provide even more flexibility. I mean, you just never know what's going to happen. So the goal was to give them even additional flexibility beyond the range, but maybe that isn't needed and the existing range is wide enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would give, all the parties a little more certainty to at least have those kinds of parameters. And I think that's a good approach, and it does also ensure, savings for consumers. I know we're not talking about the TCA yet, but I do have a proposal on the TCA, but I'll keep that out until we finish this discussion.
Commissioner Gilman, your proposal, reaction to mine, take it anywhere you'd like.
Okay. Well, I guess first I just wanted maybe a broad comment about the goal to keep the credit rating constant. I think we just need to acknowledge that the actual eventuality of what happens there will, to some degree, be based on factors that might be beyond our control, right? Like we have a certain amount of control over how we are projecting for future expenditures, but I don't want to present that we think we have full control over what happens to the company's credit rating metric. I think we do not. I think we can come to a conclusion here that we think is a fair and reasonable balance of the company's needs and priorities with customers' needs and priorities. But so anyway, I maybe just want to make that clarification that I don't think we should be making a move that intentionally upsets the balance or changes things, but the actual determination of where that lands is somewhat out of our hands. And I think that's maybe an appropriate recognition.
Totally agreed.
Yeah, so I don't want to project that we would go to all ends to keep it the same. We will not. I think we consider that as part of this decision. just thinking through, maybe to give you some of my initial thinking, especially given what you've brought up as concerns with potentially upsetting the settlement agreement. While I was not under the impression that the settlement agreement likely would have been where I would have landed had this been fully litigated, that's not necessarily part of the test on if it's fair and reasonable. I was probably more inclined to go with the settlement agreement as it was, given the broad range of stakeholders that we have in it, including quite a few consumer advocates, consumer voices represented there. But I likely did have a different view on the TCA. So I think that we might have to have all of the discussions together before we come to some conclusion. I think that is an area where we certainly can show more cost discipline. And that's a place that we could go, especially in response to current affordability concerns. The other thing I wanted to bring up was, you brought up a lot kind of to consider this treatment as it relates to the gas rate case. And there's not much testimony, I don't think, like directly comparing the two. But I think in thinking of reasons we might want those to be the same exact financial treatment as far as investment goes, there could potentially also be reasons why they should not be the same in terms of concerns we see over the gas system with the potential for stranded assets and the signal we're sending in terms of investment in that area. And so it's just worth probably weighing through, not necessarily presuming they should be the same at the onset, although I agree some of the underlying economics and the company is the same, but there may also be reasons those could or should be different. So I know that was a convoluted explanation, but I was generally thinking that the settlement could represent a fair and reasonable outcome, but would have different views on the TCA. So tell us where you'd like to go.
I think I'd like, if Mr. Mendelson and Ms. Friedman are amenable, I think I'd like to talk through the TCA issues before coming back to energy. Mr. Davis.
Yes. I'm the one who's presenting the TCA, and let me begin. As Ms. Friedman explained earlier, the settlement is intended to resolve the 2023 TCA. The agreement permits Public Service to recover about $14.8 million of additional transmission costs over 4 months, September through December of this year. The settlement also includes a roll-in of about $31 million of costs previously collected through the TCA into base rates for continued cost recovery going forward. This means that the parties have agreed to no changes to the TCA structure, scope, and calculation as to the 2023 TCA that was filed last November, and no changes for the 2022 TCA and 2021 TCA that preceded it, since those costs are also part of the roll-in, and there are various reconciliations regarding the 2021 costs in terms of the TCA tariff anyway. And by entering into the agreement, staff has withdrawn any challenges to the prudency of the projects included in the 2023 TCA. Notwithstanding the resolution of the 2023 TCA issues, the parties have asked the Commission to resolve the question whether the TCA should change beginning with the 2024 TCA, or in other words, whether it's time to reconsider what transmission costs are eligible for recovery through the company's TCA tariff. To be precise, the settlement states that the Commission is asked to decide in this proceeding, first, whether to apply prospectively, beginning with the company's 2024 TCA, which projects qualify for TCA recovery per statute, and second, whether the TCA should continue as forward-looking cost recovery mechanism. The advocacy in this case entails a lot of statutory interpretation, legislative intent, and many legal avenues. Notwithstanding this considerable advocacy, The intervening parties really present no proposed language to modify the TCA tariff to implement the changes they seek, and the record in this case provides little other practical guidance on how the suggested reforms to the TCA would actually be accomplished before November of 2023, and that's when the 2024 TCA is to be filed pursuant to the TCA tariff. And as a result, I think the Commission is left to develop its own language without the benefit of the vetting of the parties and including input from the company as how these adjustments to its tariff would affect its planning and operations. In the absence of such guidance from the intervening parties, advisors suggest that the Commission look at Public Service's existing TCA tariff sheets when deciding whether to change the TCA prospectively. Sheet number 142B of the TCA tariff says that the company's TCA reflects the ongoing capital costs associated with the transmission investment that are not being recovered through the company's base rates. The tariff defines transmission costs that are recovered through the TCA as the projected increase of the 13-month average net transmission plant for the year when the TCA will be in effect. Those really are the specific words in the TCA tariff that are subject to the debate left for the Commission to resolve now. Turning to the position of the parties here, in its SOP, staff points to a troubling trend over the last 15 years of Public Service, including significant routine replacement and repair of transmission infrastructure costs in TCA revenue requirements. Staff recommends that the Commission revisit its interpretation of Section 40-5-1014 of the statute to more accurately reflect what it claims to be the clear legislative intent of Senate Bill 07100, that is, the promotion of new construction and expansion of transmission facilities in consideration of renewable generation, and not a direct substitution for recovery of routine repair and replacement through a rate case. Staff argues that the TCA statute intended to provide an incentive to utilities in the form of expedited recovery to invest in additional transmission. According to staff, utilities do not need to be incentivized to repair and replace failing equipment because of the ongoing obligation of the company to maintain a reliable transmission system. Staff asks the Commission to establish in this rate case a new framework to determine project recovery eligibility under the TCA. Staff asks the Commission to adopt in these deliberations today the Commission's own standard for the determination of TCA cost eligibility, and in doing so, staff asks the Commission to consider a three-pronged framework of authorization, expansion, and prudency. Regarding authorization, staff states that the TCA eligible costs would be associated with projects for which the company has received a CPCN or for which the Commission has determined does not require a CPCN. But staff also seems to indicate that projects completed in the ordinary course of business should not be eligible for recovery through the TCA. Staff suggests that a project should only be considered expansion if it allows for the injection of new generation capacity to the utilities grid. According to staff, when replacement is the primary purpose of a transmission project, the Commission should not consider the project as expansion. And for prudency, staff recommends that the Commission engage in ongoing monitoring to determine if projects are on time and within budget via performance indicators. Staff suggests, for example, that this process include a requirement that a utility complete 95% of its scheduled work and demonstrate that the annual ratio of the percentage of work completed to the percentage of actual spend to budget for each project equals or exceeds 95% of the budgeted amount. And if a project does not satisfy these requirements, Public Service may pursue transmission project cost recovery in its next rate case, but will be unable to recover the costs for the ineligible project using the TCA. Staff concludes that without such a framework, staff and the other interested interveners may expend valuable resources to evaluate future TCA proceedings. Staff further states in its SOP that if the company is no longer entitled to forward-looking TCA recovery, the company would experience a 1-year lag between incurring costs and the recovery since the TCA operates on a yearly basis. Staff states that this is, quote, a minimal delay for the company and a delay that is necessary to ensure costs are borne by those ratepayers that benefit from the expense, unquote. Staff concludes that Public Service fails to recognize that some regulatory lag is necessary to sufficiently address the question of prudence. Turning to the Colorado Energy Consumers Group and its SOP, it asked the Commission to order Public Service to restructure the TCA to eliminate any forward-looking cost recovery and thus better align the TCA with rate-making practices in Colorado. CEC argues that if the TCA is redesigned to recover only prudently incurred costs that have actually been incurred at the time the TCA rate goes into effect, that is before January 1st of each year, customers would only be paying rates that reflect the cost of transmission assets that are already in service. CEC contrasts that situation to the forward-looking TCA, where customer rates reflect both the cost of existing facilities as well as the cost of facilities the company anticipates bringing online and putting into service in the upcoming year. CEC argues, however, that for a portion of every year, customers are paying higher rates due to the cost of facilities that are not yet in service. And CEC warns that if there is a delay in a transmission line coming into service, and the service date is pushed, for example, into a subsequent calendar year, customers could be paying rates, including the costs of a line not yet in service, for over a year. And finally, CEC argues that accelerated recovery associated with an annual historic mechanism is more than sufficient to provide a powerful incentive to Public Service to build all of the transmission necessary and appropriate to accommodate Colorado's clean energy transition. Now, in response to that advocacy, Public Service requests that the Commission maintain the existing TCA and decline to adopt staff and CEC's recommendations. Public Service largely argues that none of staff's 3 prongs should be adopted. It points to problems with each component of the new test, ranging from being unnecessary or unworkable to being fundamentally inconsistent with the plain language of the TCA statute and prior Commission decisions. For example, with respect to authorization, the company argues that there's no need for the Commission to make these determinations of eligibility every year upon receiving TCA filings or in any other forum. Public Service adds that it's unclear how staff's proposed authorization prong is really intended to work in practice. It's unclear, for instance, how the company would seek a Commission determination for TCA eligibility prior to including projects in the TCA. Public Service also characterizes the prudency prong as a robotic application of actual results to arbitrary schedule and cost targets, and that it really does nothing to assess whether the costs of a transmission project were actually prudently incurred. The company further argues that staff's prudence test is based on no legitimate verifiable statistical process. And turning to the forward-looking or current cost recovery aspect of the TCA, Public Service argues that the purpose of a cost recovery rider is to provide more timely recovery of costs than would be achieved through a rate case, such as this one. According to Public Service, by allowing utilities to more quickly recover the costs of investments through the TCA encourages and facilitates those investments. Public Service further argues that modifying the TCA to only allow recovery of historic transmission investments would create a misalignment between the company's investments and costs, which would in turn directly impact the company's financial integrity by introducing additional regulatory lag to the company's recovery of prudently incurred costs. Public Service further argues that there are safeguards in place in the TCA in the form of an annual true-up in the event that the company's forecasted investments do not match actual investments. Public Service also provides references to a series of previous Commission decisions that support current recovery of costs through the TCA through the use of using forecast estimates. Among those decisions cited by the company is the recent order approving the settlement agreement and granting a CPCN for the Colorado Power Pathway. Public Service suggests that modifying the company's TCA rider to prohibit current cost recovery would be a material change to the commission-approved CPP settlement agreement, as well as a departure from prior commission TCA decisions. So I think because the commission has not yet really voted on the settlement, there are two decision points for you regarding the TCA. First, does the commission accept the TCA related terms in the settlement? And second, does the commission want to change the TCA in this proceeding along the lines suggested by staff and CEC? So now I'll turn it over to you for your discussion. I can answer questions and I can also provide recommendations.
So I guess I'll just start really briefly and say I would accept the settlement terms historically and for 2023. And one point on the legal issues, I just say I believe the statute delegates to us the authority to allow cost recovery consistent with requirements of the overall public interest as based on the evidence in the record before us. So I would not endorse either the prior statutory interpretation or make a new one at this time. As a matter of policy on this record, I think we have the room to either continue the cost eligibility and recovery approaches that have prevailed for the last 15 years, or we can modify the TCA to address staff concerns about the rapid growth in dollars in the TCA, including routine expenses. So I will not say anything about where I come down on the policy matter, but unless it's a threshold issue, Commissioner Plan or any concerns with the historical and 2023 TCA, and any thoughts on the legal interpretations?
Yeah, I mean, I'll hold off on the 23 TCA. I think, I am, and while it's a little confusing to me how we have a 22 date for one thing and a 23 date for something else, and that at this point, I would wait to hear your thoughts on the 23 and Commissioner Gilman's thoughts on the 23. With respect to the actual issue outside of the settlement agreement and the issue brought up by the staff, they're suggesting that the interpretation doesn't meet the legislative intent, and I'm somewhat sympathetic to that argument. But I don't think that when we look at the plain language of the statute, there's a lot of general terms and not a lot of confined definition of where the top is. It sort of establishes what I would say a floor of things that would comply, and really doesn't explicitly take things out or clearly delineate where the ceiling is. And with respect to that, I think that's as staff has pointed out, I think that we've seen that ceiling rise over time because there's not a clear exclusion of certain things within the statute. And so what I would suggest with respect to, sort of, I think of this as a what and a when question. So what is it that qualifies for TCA, and when do they recover it? I do have one proposal to just put out there for discussion, and can put that up on the screen at this point. And what we would do, according to this proposal, we go down a little bit. What we would do is just add a new definition or a new thing under the definitions, and just clearly say what is a TCA qualified project. This complies with the statute, but also puts a little bit of parameters around what it is that would comply as a TCA qualified project. And I would simply say here, capital costs associated with transmission investment that results in a net increase in transmission capacity. That's I think really the heart of what we're trying to accomplish with the TCA rider. And to the when question, the language in the transmission cost paragraph here would just simply move that to the determination of what would be recovered under the TCA to a month 13-month average for the preceding year, so that rather than trying to prospectively estimate what the company might be spending and collecting that money in advance and truing up at the end of the year, we would just simply, to the point that I think staff made, use the prudency of the look back at the preceding year. So those are the two primary changes within this, and I'll send this around to you guys if you want to spend some time kind of looking it over, and you may have proposals of your own as well.
Has this been reviewed by council?
It has, yes.
Commissioner Gilman, very appreciate the creative, thoughtful proposal, and if you could just leave that up. And the entire paragraph, transmission cost, is new?
No, it's mostly the same as what was in there. The only thing that was changed was the perspective versus retrospective look at what constitutes the TCA rider.
If you could circulate a red line, that'd be really helpful for me. Commissioner Gilman, your thoughts?
So just to clarify, Commissioner Plant, this in your view first narrows the type of project, only projects providing new or increased capacity. And then second moves from a forward-looking, essentially collecting current year even before a project is complete to 1 year look back. Is that
Correct.
accurate? Okay. Yeah, I mean, for me, I do think that adjustments are warranted here in terms of how we look at this, especially going forward to, I would say, 2024 and beyond, especially given all of the affordability challenges and concerns brought up in this proceeding. I think it's important for us to look at all opportunities to ensure that we're providing ratepayers with the best value and savings that we can. In this case, looking back at the statute and what the commission's done thus far, to me, I think the commission's been more generous in the past than is required for, as Commissioner Plant put it, the floor of what the legislation requires the commission to provide in terms of a TCA, and the inclusion specifically around, I think, what staff takes the most issue with, these routine repair and replacement projects that don't necessarily provide new capacity or increased capacity in any areas. And for me, I'd prefer to see this narrowed as we move forward with 2024 and beyond, so that we provide as much cost discipline as possible in areas that I think it's less clear to see what the legislative intent was, but that probably fall beyond what the statute required the commission to provide this recovery for in terms of the rider. So I think this is certainly a potential fix, Commissioner Plant, as I look at it. I think there's also this is probably a more immediate fix. I think we can discuss if we'd like to potentially have this issue be part of the rulemaking. I know we've already discussed the potential for a transmission related rulemaking. So this could nest under there in terms of, what types of projects for including any other planning adjustments. I haven't heard any reference to some of staff's other kind of prongs of if a project makes it or doesn't. And I think it's probably premature to act on some of those much more detailed decisions, but that's something that could be part of a rulemaking, especially as we look to try to make this be somewhat consistent from utility to utility between Black Hills and Public Service in terms of how the TCA is being applied. So I guess Mr. Davis or Ms. Harper, whoever's in charge, do you think this, I mean, my interest primarily was to, I think is aligned with how Commissioner Plant has defined TCA qualified projects in terms of making it clear to exclude those routine repair and replacement projects, but just wanted to get a sense from you all if you think that is an effective result of this language change.
Well, I think that modifying the tariff is the way to go forward in order to ensure that these same issues aren't litigated in the 2024 TCA proceeding when that filing is made in November. As I stated earlier, it's unfortunate that the record here in this case didn't have any vetting of how to actually implement the changes that staff and CEC were proposing. But I think this is the best way to go about making these changes if that's what the commission decides to do as a policy matter. And to the rulemaking, yes, the commission has signaled interest in doing a transmission rulemaking, and this cost recovery element of the for transmission investment should belong in that rulemaking. The purpose of that rulemaking is to re-examine CPCN requirements as well as transmission planning requirements. And it also is intended to look at the introduction of performance incentive mechanisms, and with that to re-examining after the fact prudency reviews. The TCA is integral, I think, to any sort of performance measure because of the incentive that comes from the improved cash flow that comes from this sort of mechanism.
Do you mind if I jump in and ask council a question, Commissioner Gomez, or did you have more? Mr. Gomez, is there, and I'm not asking for a binding legal opinion. I'm just, is there a reasonable basis in the record to make these tariff changes?
I honestly, I don't know if there's something in the record to do that or not, since I wasn't actively involved in the case. So I would have to confer with counsel who was involved and make a determination if that's the case or not, depending on file testimony and any testimony during the settlement hearing.
Is Ms. Harper, do you have a view? Maybe not.
As Mr. Davis has said a few times, the sort of deficiency in the record was actual language to go into the tariff to make the changes that staff and CEC were advocating for. There is basis in the testimony for narrowing the types of projects, and I think for narrowing the types of projects consistent with the language that Commissioner Plant has put forward. So the only deficiency is that the commission itself had to come up with this language, but I do think it is grounded in the testimony.
Appreciate that. Well, I guess I'm probably in the middle of the two of you. I think it's maybe a bridge too far for me, Commissioner Plant, to adjust 2023, but I'd be open to this tariff change applying to 2024. Although I gotta spend some time looking at it. And I don't fully understand what it means for the carrying costs associated with something like the Colorado Power Pathway, and if we're, meaningfully shifting carrying costs for that under this proposal. So I feel the need to get underneath that. But especially the first language, I'd be open to do that, but I would not wait to some future rulemaking to make this change. So I guess Commissioner Plant, any thoughts on that? And then Commissioner Gilman, what you think about changing this language for maybe 2024, Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, and I proposed this for 24, so I think that's consistent, and beyond, which I think is consistent. And that's, I wanted to hear what your guys' thoughts were about 2023. But I intended this for 2024 and beyond. And, the power pathway would obviously be a net increase in transmission capacity, which would be authorized under this TCA qualified project. And I think it also adds in that prudency of ensuring that the costs actually happen but still collecting them faster than within a rate case. So I think it's a good middle ground, but understand that you may want to just sit with the language, and you may have some suggestions as well for changes in the language.
I guess Commissioner Gilman, if we do go down a path, I would go down your route and just accept the revenue requirement provisions in the settlement agreement as is. But where are you on the TCA? Are you open to language like this, or are you just wanting to put it into a future rulemaking?
Mr. Davis, maybe if I can just clarify something. So I think it's November. The November filing here would be for 2024 TCA filing, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I feel like there was a little confusion about that. So for me, I would opt to approve this settlement agreement as it refers to the 2023 TCA. I'm supportive of these changes for the 2024 TCA, which will begin with that filing in November, to my understanding. So this would set the expectation of how, on a prospective basis, the TCA would be treated.
All right, so I guess what we have is a 3-0 vote to approve the revenue requirement components of the settlement agreement, a proposal to modify the TCA tariff language consistent with the TCA qualified projects, and a desire, at least for me, to better understand the timing impacts of cost recovery. I guess it may be a bridge too far for me even to change the timing right now, but I'd like to get under it a little more, Commissioner Plant. You just walk me through it one more time. Right now, it's the cost recovery is based on a year ahead forecast, and you're proposing it being backward looking, based on a historical 13-month average.
Right, for the immediately preceding year. So it would instead of projecting what the cost would be in the future year, collecting what they think those costs would be, and then returning back any true up at the end of the year, it would instead go through the year, look back, do a 13-month average, and set the rider based on that number, so that there wouldn't need to be a true up. Basically, it would be based on what was invested.
Yeah, I don't think I can agree to that. I think the Colorado Power Pathway project was approved and implemented based on the existing TCA structure. And I would view this as a significant modification as we head into a world where where these expenses are going to ramp up. So I would just say I'm struggling with this component of it based on the CPP approval process. Now, I don't know, I'll turn it back to you in a second, Commissioner Plant, but I think this may be too much for me. Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, so I think the reasonable middle ground may be to order a tariff change that will occur at the conclusion of this proceeding in time for that November filing for the 2024 expenses. That at least just makes that first change in terms of the TCA qualified projects, narrowing the scope specifically to projects that result in a net increase in transmission capacity. Perhaps we leave the forward-looking recovery as it is now, but do include all of these topics to be dealt with in the transmission-related rulemaking so that we can, in a way that's generally applicable to both electric utilities, look at the pros and cons of the forward-looking recovery versus the 1 year after, look at probably more holistic kind of definitions of projects for inclusion, as well as any other planning adjustments like those that were brought up within this proceeding. And that would allow us to do so in a way that develops the record to understand what the outcomes would be. And probably importantly, it develops what that bridge looks like if you do change from forward-looking to another type of recovery, what that looks like on a year where you're transitioning from one to the other, which would, I think, if we did it right now, look like zero money coming in that interim year where you're changing. So perhaps that's a middle ground or an avenue to kind of somewhat immediately address the project inclusion type question, but then kick to a rulemaking, these broader questions and have that be generally applicable, especially so that we can get better consistency across utilities, and this is being done and consider.
I don't know if we just lost Commissioner Gilman. You
Can you hear me? Did I finish?
You were fading out there.
I got unstable internet. So two-pronged approach, change the project exclusion now in time for the 2024 filing, the project inclusion kind of requirements, but then kick the timing, the forward-looking, as well as the broader question of project inclusion and other planning adjustments into the transmission-related rulemaking to have that be generally applicable, especially because one of my focuses is ensuring that we have some consistency where reasonably applicable across the electric utilities in their approach.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I would be, I'd be amenable to doing that. I would point out, I think that currently Black Hills does a retrospective, and this kind of came, the forward-looking, as I understand it, Mr. Davis, the forward-looking came out of a settlement on another case that was just a few years ago, but that it had been retrospective prior to that.
Yeah, but I think it was more than a few years ago. I think it was a 2014 rate case.
All right, so I think we're gonna, on the revenue requirement, we'll accept the settlement provisions. We'll change the TCA qualified projects to the language or something along the lines of the language that Commissioner Plant circulated. I wouldn't mind reserving the rights to to think about that and talk to council. And then we're gonna, state an intent to initiate a rulemaking on transmission planning and cost recovery in the coming weeks and months to address the when issue. Commissioner Gilman.
Maybe just a follow-up question to that. Are we concluding deliberations today, we think?
I would like to.
Okay, I'm just a
but-
little unclear if you're gonna give more thought to the language of project conclusion, when or where that would come back. If you're not.
Probably in a TBC order. Ms. Harper?
I think it would make the most sense to come back 8:30 weekly meeting to finalize that tariff language and that question about the timing.
Okay. All right, well, we can put this back on the maybe August 30th agenda. But hopefully we'll get far enough along that council and advisors and the team can get very close to getting the order done. All right. I think we're through the TCA. You want to, Ms. Friedman, you want to take up the remaining issues in the settlement agreement?
Sure. Yeah, Boulder has two other issues within the settlement agreement. The first is with the Energy Insecurity Working Group, which in the settlement, Public Service agrees to work with stakeholders in proceeding 23M0013EG in an Energy Insecurity Working Group to develop an estimate of the number of energy insecure customers, to discuss potential actions to reduce energy insecurity for customers, including those near the Energy Assistance Program threshold, and how to include electrification in energy insecurity definitions. The company, according to the settlement, is to file a narrative summarizing these discussions within 6 months of a final decision in this proceeding. Boulder objects to this provision of the settlement for 4 reasons. First, Boulder contends the working group will not quantify the annual costs of energy insecurity, which Boulder defines as the amount bills must be reduced so that no customer pays more than 4% of annual household income on energy bills. Boulder maintains that knowing this cost is necessary in order to develop tools to eliminate energy insecurity. Second, the settlement does not require Public Service to reduce insecurity for any customer paying more than 4% of total household income for energy. Third, the settlement implies that energy assistance programs are the answer to addressing energy insecurity, but Boulder believes the approach should be more broad. Additionally, Boulder is concerned that the lack of a definition of customers whose household incomes are near energy assistance programs needs to be addressed. And finally, Boulder objects to Public Service's methodology to estimate energy insecure customers, which was to divide bills by median income at the census block level. Boulder contends this methodology does not provide data that is essential to the analysis and does not account for the possibility that most residents in a census tract could earn less than the median income for that census tract. Boulder states it has doubts about Public Service's commitment to reducing energy insecurity and therefore recommends using a third-party facilitator to run the stakeholder workshop. Boulder questions proceeding number 23M0013EG as the venue for the stakeholder process, recommending instead that the process be part of a rate case because these proceedings address investments and operations. Boulder also argues that the Commission's Affordability Initiative Work Plan, proceeding number 22M0171 and affordability programs in proceeding numbers 23AL0176E and 177G would be appropriate venues for this work. I can turn this to your discussion, or I can make a recommendation on this specific part of Boulder's objection to the settlement.
I'd welcome a recommendation.
Sure. So advisors recommend denying Boulder's specific directives as to the Energy Insecurity Working Group, but we also recommend adding a requirement that the report include options for a path forward to address energy insecurity, in addition to the settlement's requirement of the working group that the working group discuss energy insecurity definitions and actions to reduce energy insecurity. As Boulder points out, the goal of the working group is not to eradicate energy insecurity, but to explore paths to reduce it. The settlement's requirement that a report be provided to the Commission within 6 months of a final decision in this proceeding will allow the Commission and stakeholders to determine appropriate next steps. Additionally, at hearing, Public Service indicated agreement that the company need not lead the working group. However, given that the company must provide a report within 6 months of the final decision in this proceeding, the most expedient course will be to maintain Public Service as the lead. Therefore, advisors recommend denying Boulder's request for another entity to lead the initial working group. During the course of the working group's discussions, they can determine if another lead entity is available and present that to the Commission and Public Services report. So in summary, we recommend adding a requirement that that report include options for path forward, and we recommend denying Boulder's request for a different entity to lead the initial working group.
Commissioner Plant,
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I generally support the recommendation, but certainly want to encourage Excel or Public Service to take into account the suggestions of stakeholders like the City of Boulder, to try to ensure that the outcome here really takes into account the different perspectives and requests being made from them. To the extent to which CEO is willing and able and well positioned to assist in some of those efforts, as I think I heard in the hearing they may be, then that could be appropriate. So I don't want to preclude that someone could or should help them as well. I don't think we necessarily need to order exactly who it is, but would certainly encourage the company to make a sincere effort to include these other opinions, especially of those like municipalities who are closer to those customers in several circumstances and can understand some of the situations.
I support the recommendation. I also support Commissioner Gilman's language being included in the order. Would that work for you, Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, that works great.
And I guess I have a couple issues in this area I'd like to add. Would now be the right time on energy and security and low income issues to raise those issues, Ms. Friedman?
I think this is appropriate, sure. So
again, I had a couple comments about paragraph 70 of the settlement agreement, which I'm fine with, but it talks about the number of energy and secure customers and asks us, as you say, to create a stakeholder process to further explore ways to reduce it. As part of our decision in this case, and consistent with Mr. Hayes' testimony at hearing, I'd like to have an additional finding in this order that there's far more customers in need of support than we have resources to meet that need. Given that reality, I'd like to ask CEO and the company to initiate a pilot effort to reach out to recently disconnected customers to better understand why they got disconnected, what happens after the disconnection, the barriers and challenges to reconnection, and if there's anything we can do to help. I believe that Mr. Hay in his oral testimony at hearing agreed to explore ways that CEO could help lead that effort. I'd also like to request that CEO and the company explore using the key elements of the company's propensity to pay model, arrearage payment trend, assistance call, and disconnect notice history and data to see if we can find ways to better identify customers who need help the most. I believe that Mr. Hay in his oral testimony at hearing also expressed a willingness to explore ways to help the most vulnerable customers. So I'm just asking for language in this order, requesting CEO and the company work in these areas. So Commissioner Plant, any thoughts on that?
I think that sounds great.
Commissioner Gilman.
I think we might want to narrow or be more specific in terms of who the target of the survey is. As I understand it from the company, a pretty significant number of customers who are disconnected are reconnected somewhat immediately. So there are kind of two buckets of customers here, if you will. There's like the disconnects, involuntary disconnects that then are somewhat immediately reconnected, and then folks who remain disconnected. And they probably are in quite different circumstances and have quite different outcomes from that as a result. So I don't know if you'll have a way to maybe include that in your thoughts, in that these are two kind of disparate groups, maybe, and how I'm looking at what the outcomes are.
I totally support including that distinction. Okay, that seems to work for Commissioner Plant. So
yeah, aside from that, are you setting any sort of kind of timeline or expectation as far as when the commission hears what the results are here, or sort of where this goes from here?
Excellent point. What do you think? Report back to us in 6 months, 9 months? You know, yeah, why don't we say ask the parties to come back to us by mid 2024, something like that.
Okay, and that may relate to part of, I think, Boulder's specific kind of directives or things they wanted out of the energy and security working group was also a recommendation from us that they had a recommendation that we set a requirement that the report includes options for a path forward to address energy insecurity. So it could be tied in with that timeline. Ms. Friedman, maybe you can help me. I don't have the timeline in my head of when the energy insecurity working group is reporting back, but perhaps we tie this. It's just a requirement with no known timeline tends to get lost in the shuffle, I found.
So if your final decision in this case issues at the beginning of September, 6 months would be in March, the end of March, if I'm calculating my months correctly. So that would mean that the working group from the settlement would provide their report by beginning of April, end of March, beginning of April. With Chairman Blank's request to say, well, maybe mid 2024, that gives a little extra time for things to get organized with the survey. So those might align fairly well.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm saying, if you mid 2024, maybe be more specific and say June 1, which would be 2 months after the report would be supplied to the commission.
And perhaps I'm just thinking, Chairman, that your suggestion, especially on like a survey that would go to disconnected customers to understand the circumstances and outcomes, perhaps the working group as a whole would be better suited to kind of properly word and message that than just the company and CEO, you know, especially consider there might be some animosity or hesitancy among customers who had been disconnected to respond directly to a communication from the company. But, you know, to the extent we have like more specific low income expertise in that working group, I think they could perfect that past maybe just what a group of two could do.
Should we just, Ms. Friedman, should we just integrate this into the stakeholder process and have it report out at the same time as the rest? That's probably what I'd do, and I'd eliminate the reference to the company and COE and just ask the stakeholder group to do that.
Okay, and I counted on my fingers and realized that 6 months from the beginning of September puts us into March, not April, because we have all of September. So we would be looking now at this coming in to you in March, not in April. But and that could be, I think, combined, as you say, your survey combined with the work that the stakeholder group is doing.
Yeah, and I wouldn't narrow it to a survey. It's just outreach. You know, I would view it as more in-person interviews, something like that. Thank you, Ms. Friedman. Do we have other issues?
I have one other issue that I just want to, the specific issue that Boulder raised, and then we still have some of the settlement issue to talk about. But Boulder specifically raised a concern about recovery of legal costs, because in the settlement and its SOP, Boulder notes that public service was willing to settle for 80% less than its initial case and questions the $2 million allowed for in rate case expenses. So Boulder suggests that the commission evaluate opportunities to mitigate inappropriate and unnecessary litigation in the future, and advisors recommend that the commission acknowledge that the commission will evaluate opportunities to mitigate inappropriate and unnecessary litigation in the future.
Commissioner Plant, Commissioner Gilman.
I agree.
As do I. And so just, we'll see where we get, but at 12 o'clock, I'm going to take a 15-minute break if we're not done by then. So just so everybody's operating on the same schedule. Ms. Friedman, keep going.
Well, if I'm looking at my notes, I think what the commission has yet to determine is back to your question about the settlement approval, or as you had indicated, maybe modification of the settlement. I think what's been determined is that the TCA issue will return August 30th, but the settlement itself has yet to be voted on by the commission.
With Commissioner Plant's change to the TCA, I'm ready to approve the other elements of the settlement agreement. Commissioner Plant?
So when you say approve the other elements, do you mean including the WAC and the capital structure?
Yes, I will. With your change to the TCA, which I think will reduce recovery significantly, I'm prepared to accept the other provisions in the settlement agreement. I would not try and modify the revenue requirement and alter the TCA.
Understand.
So,
Yeah, I agree with that.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, and I think I previewed in response to your initial that I saw them as somewhat related in terms of where we find the capital discipline. So I too am fine with supporting the settlement agreement, especially given the adjustments we've decided to make with the TCA. I do want to, I can't let go without comment the Cabin Creek issue raised in this proceeding. I'm very troubled by the Cabin Creek construction and performance issues that were raised by staff within this proceeding. It's certainly my hope that the proceeding stemming from the settlement agreement to evaluate Cabin Creek will provide a clear view of what happened in this instance and help us to have a roadmap forward to ensure accountability for company-owned generation in the future as it relates to the outage length of this really extended outage for an asset that was not able to provide ratepayers with a benefit during all of those years. Additionally, Mr. Berman indicated in his testimony and hearing that this proceeding that will follow will provide a venue to review the inclusion of this expense in rate base. So I expect that to be a fulsome effort, and appreciate staff raising this issue. But to me, it also raises probably a broader issue that I think we need to consider, especially as we move into the conclusion of public services ERP, in terms of how we really have meaningful treatment of company-owned resources, both in terms of upfront capital expenses, but also, as we see here, ongoing operations of those resources and when they should and shouldn't be contained in rate base, and what sort of costs should be borne by ratepayers in those circumstances. So to me, I think at least there appears to be an immediate path forward here that all parties have indicated will include an evaluation of inclusion of rate base for these assets. And don't get me wrong, these are wonderful assets when they're operating and providing a benefit to customers. The issue is they were not providing a benefit to customers for years. and years beyond what the company had projected. And so I think we have a path forward here, but I more want to make the point. I think we have our work cut out for us in the ERP to really ensure that we have are sufficiently sending the signals on cost containment, especially in capital expectations, as well as the actual performance of company-owned assets in terms of, first of all, protecting ratepayers when those costs are significantly in excess of what was expected. But second, in ensuring that we really have a fair and balanced approach to company-owned versus IPP assets, and being sure that those look probably somewhat more similar moving forward in terms of the expectations that we place on them. So just wanted to flag that for the ERP, because to me, this is related in terms of a company-owned asset, and I would like to see us continuing this discussion as we move into that venue.
Let me just go a little bit further and say I'd like to include language in our decision, both highlighting that issue, but also the cost overruns described by UCA witness Mr. Neal, which were over $200 million as against the initial estimates. Given that those overruns are now in the historical test year and going in the rates in this decision, I'd like a finding in our order talking about the limits of this process, the after the fact prudency review, to address these cost overruns in this case. And that, like you say, highlights the importance of aligning incentives between the utility and customers. The goal has to be when the customers win, the company wins, and vice versa. And I don't think that happened here. And, I totally agree with you on the timing, performance, and cost overruns on Cabin Creek. We're just placing tens of millions of dollars of higher costs into rates, not even counting the delays. So I'd like an explicit finding in this order, flagging that issue, and stating our intent that we're going to deal with this through PIMs and other mechanisms in the ERP. So Commissioner Plant, and then I'll come back to you, Commissioner Goman.
Yeah, no, I agree with those points made by both of you. I just, because since you're sort of backing away from your proposal, Mr. Chairman, I think that you've made a compelling argument for a range and the importance of having that kind of flexibility within a range of capital structures. And I think that somewhere, while we're accepting the settlement in this case, I think somewhere in this decision, I think we should send a very clear signal that for future settling parties, or for in the future for any rate case deliberations, that they do adhere to that kind of a range, because I think it is really important to have that kind of flexibility. And I think you've made a really compelling argument to that importance. And I'm disappointed that we won't see it in this case, but I think you made a very compelling argument. We should see it in the future.
Well, and hopefully the decision can reflect the difficulties we're having. I think at least two commissioners were having on the common equity ratio and the process. And the party should be aware that there were 2 votes to deny the revenue requirement elements of the settlement agreement, potentially. So I don't know, Commissioner Gilman, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I was just going to go back to the ERP link for a minute and say, I mean, I even before this was considering we really needed some capital costs containment measures coming out of that to ensure that what was modeled reasonably is expected to be the performance. I think what this highlighted for me, especially with Cabin Creek, is there's an ongoing operations concern as well that potentially should be part of that analysis to ensure that we understand, much like you would have when an IPP signs a contract and has performance expectations for how that resource will perform and at what point they will and won't receive recovery of the funds for that. It just, to me, is a glaring lack in our process that here we have an asset that was not operating for years but was still, seemingly expected by the company to be in rate base. And I think we can do better in the ERP process to not only contain initial capital investment in these projects and hold that, in some form or fashion to what we're seeing in the modeling and why we made those decisions, but also to have better ongoing expectations of performance and what that means for inclusion in rate base or penalties or whatever it may be if those expectations are not met. And that way we better protect ratepayers as well as better align company resources with IPP resources in terms of their performance and their expectations. So that's where I'm going with ERP and really what we learned here. And I know we have a path forward here where this will be analyzed and looked at, and arguments will be made for rate base inclusion in this circumstance, still ongoing. But
yeah, and I would list the 4 things. It's capital cost, operating cost, availability, and timing. Those 4 things need their own separate metrics based on the initial filing and with some form of symmetric performance requirements. And I'd just say it in this order based on the fact that there's huge cost overruns and huge performance problems. All right, does that give you everything we need, Ms. Friedman?
I think so.
And I think that's going to be a TBC order, and we'll see where we get in the TBC process, but maybe we need to bring it back on September 6th. So,
And then you'll also have the discussion on the 30th.
yeah, I mean, maybe we'll see where we are on the order, but I'd bring it all back at once. And I think it's probably going to be on the 6th, but if you're ready on the 30th, we'll do it on the 30th.
We will strive for the 30th.
Okay. And I just want to say thanks to both of you for the and the Advisors Council and the parties for the deep and thoughtful record. And I feel like we got to a good place on affordability. I think the restructuring of the TCA will help on affordability, which is really driving me, including spending a ton of time trying to found an alternative on revenue requirement. Thanks to both of you. So I don't know, any final thoughts, Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, and I'd share that sentiment, and also thanks to you for your leadership in pulling us through this case. And I learned a lot. So thanks.
Appreciate it, Commissioner Gelman.
yeah, certainly echo your thanks, and thanks as well to the parties for really engaging in a number of different issues and bringing those to the commission's attention. And as we see, some are immediately actionable, some are actionable in the future, and a lot, teach us, changes to maybe our processes or things we really need to be working on, and all of that's incredibly valuable. So certainly appreciate that there was a very wide range of interests represented in this settlement agreement, including fairly well all of the consumer interests and consumer advocacy. So appreciate that person getting here.
All right, Mr. Sarah, we're not breaking yet.
No, this is really quick though. I just want to clarify for everyone that because you voted on the revenue requirement parts of the settlement agreement, those deliberations are concluded as to those issues. So what's left for you all to decide is the language that you'd like to see in the tariff with respect to the TCA eligible projects, or whatever Commissioner Plant's specific.
Yeah, I'd say it a little differently. I'd say we got a TBC decision, and there may be issues in the TBC decision that need to bring it back. And once I look at Commissioner Plant's language, we may not need to bring it back. And so it may be resolvable in the TBC process.
You didn't take a vote adopting any specific language or an intent to actually change the language that was presented today. So as Ruthie said, or Ms. Harper said, you're going to have to bring it back at least for the TCA language. And since you voted on the revenue requirement.
Should we take a vote on the TCA? So I propose a vote on the concept that Commissioner Plant presented, although, subject to potential changes in the TBC process on TCA reform. So Commissioner Plant, thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I support it.
I think that's all you need to say right now. Commissioner Goen.
I also support the changes.
As do I. Does that give you what you need, Mr. Acera, Ms. Harper?
No, because we still haven't decided whether the function of the rider is going to be a forward-looking or backward-looking collection. So
I think we're not changing that language.
Okay, that's right. That's right.
Yes, the TCA qualified projects definition.
Yeah, the what is resolved now, the when is subject to a future rulemaking.
That's right. Thank you.
All right. Subject to no one else beeping in, I think we're adjourned. Thanks to the both of you. Thanks to advisors. Thanks to council, and thanks to the parties. For that, have a good one.